Hi friends. If you're enjoying my videos, please hit the like button. It helps the YouTube algorithm notice me. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Winter 2020 was the season I made one of the worst decisions of my life. At 22, I was still nursing the wounds from a 4-year relationship that had consumed my late teens. Being alone felt impossible, and I craved connection with an urgency that clouded my judgment. The dating app was just a distraction at first, something to fill the empty hours of evenings that stretched too long. When I matched with Brendan, there was nothing particularly remarkable about our initial conversation. He was 26, employed at a local engineering firm, and seemed genuinely interested in my photography hobby. His profile showed a man with an easy smile and kind eyes. Nothing about those pixels arranged on my screen suggested what awaited me. "You have an interesting perspective," he said after I shared some of my black and white urban photography. "Most people try to make everything pretty. You find beauty in decay." That first compliment hooked me. Someone who understood my aesthetic without explanation felt rare and valuable. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown after just 2 weeks of texting. Brendan was taller in person than his photos suggested. He arrived wearing a charcoal peacoat and carrying 2 books, one on architecture, the other a collection of essays on modern art. Calculated choices, I would later realize, designed to appeal to my interests. He spoke about his work with enthusiasm that felt genuine, asked thoughtful questions, and touched my hand just once, briefly enough to seem accidental. "I'd like to see you again," he said as we parted. No presumption, no pressure. Just enough interest to make me feel wanted. I said yes without hesitation. 3 dates later, he invited me to his house. It was a modest 2-story home in an older neighborhood, inherited from his grandparents. As I stepped through the front door, something unexpected happened. A sensation I've struggled to describe ever since. The air felt different inside. Heavier. Like the atmospheric pressure had subtly increased. My breath caught slightly, as though my lungs had to work harder. I dismissed it as nerves, taking in the tasteful furnishings and family photos lining the hallway. "Make yourself comfortable," Brendan said, disappearing into the kitchen to open wine. I moved slowly through the living room, studying my surroundings. The house was well maintained but retained features from decades past. Crown molding, a brick fireplace, hardwood floors that creaked beneath my boots. Nothing unusual except for that persistent feeling of unease that followed me from room to room. In the corner, a chocolate Labrador watched me with attentive eyes. "That's Daisy," Brendan called from the kitchen. "Don't mind her, she's protective of new people." Daisy approached cautiously, sniffing my outstretched hand before pressing her body against my legs. There was something oddly desperate in the gesture, as though seeking reassurance rather than offering it. "She likes you," Brendan said, returning with 2 glasses. "That's unusual. She's normally standoffish with strangers." I stroked Daisy's head, noticing how she positioned herself between me and the hallway leading deeper into the house. "She's sweet." "The house has been in my family for generations," Brendan explained as we settled on the sofa. "My grandparents lived here until they passed. I moved in about 3 years ago." "It has character," I said, unable to shake the feeling that I was being observed from somewhere beyond Brendan's line of sight. The wine helped ease my tension, but as the evening progressed, small incidents accumulated like gathering storm clouds. A book fell from a shelf without apparent cause. The temperature in the dining room dropped noticeably when we moved there for dinner. Daisy refused to enter certain areas of the house, whining softly at thresholds. "Does anything ever feel strange here?" I asked carefully, not wanting to sound irrational. Brendan's expression flickered briefly before settling into a smile. "Old houses make noises. The heating system is ancient, creates cold spots sometimes. Nothing to worry about." His dismissal seemed practiced, as though he'd delivered this explanation many times before. When I left that night, the relief that washed over me upon stepping outside was profound. Yet within days, I found myself agreeing to return. Brendan's charm was compelling, and I convinced myself the house's oddities were products of my imagination. I didn't realize then that the unease I felt was my first warning, a primal instinct recognizing danger before my conscious mind could process it. The house knew what Brendan was long before I did, and in its way, it tried to tell me. By March, I was spending 3 or 4 nights a week at Brendan's house. The relationship progressed with methodical precision, each milestone carefully orchestrated to make me feel secure and valued. He introduced me to his friends, remembered small details from our conversations, and seemed endlessly patient with my insecurities. The incidents in the house, however, grew more frequent and harder to rationalize. Items disappeared and reappeared in impossible locations. My earrings vanished from the nightstand only to materialize inside a sealed container in the bathroom. My phone, placed deliberately on the coffee table, would somehow migrate to the back of a kitchen drawer. When I mentioned these occurrences, Brendan would furrow his brow in confusion. "Are you sure you didn't move them yourself? You've been stressed lately. Maybe you're just forgetting." His responses planted seeds of doubt. Perhaps I was becoming forgetful. Perhaps the stress of my new job was affecting my memory. The alternative, that something in the house was deliberately moving my possessions, seemed too fantastical to consider. The hallway outside Brendan's bedroom became a particular source of dread. The temperature difference was dramatic enough that crossing from the living area to the bedroom felt like stepping into a walk-in freezer. I developed a habit of hurrying through this space, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. One evening in April, while Brendan was working late, I experienced the first undeniable manifestation. I was alone in the living room with Daisy curled beside me on the sofa when the dog suddenly raised her head, hackles rising along her spine. Her focus fixed on the hallway entrance, a low growl building in her throat. "What is it, girl?" I whispered, following her gaze. Nothing visible occupied the space, yet Daisy's behavior escalated from growling to frantic barking. She positioned herself between me and whatever invisible presence had triggered her alarm, her body tense with protective fury. I sat frozen, heart hammering against my ribs as the temperature around me plummeted. The air grew so cold that my breath became visible in small, panicked clouds. From the corner of my eye, I detected movement, a shifting of shadows that suggested a figure just beyond clear sight. When Brendan returned home an hour later, I recounted the experience with shaking hands. His response was immediate dismissal. "Daisy probably heard a squirrel in the attic. This house settles in weird ways, creates drafts and shadows. You've got an active imagination." His explanation sounded rational, but his expression betrayed knowledge he wasn't sharing. Something passed behind his eyes. Recognition, perhaps even satisfaction. Before he pulled me into an embrace that felt more possessive than comforting. That night, I awoke at 3:17 a.m. to find Daisy standing rigid beside the bed, her attention fixed on the partially open bedroom door. Beyond the threshold, the hallway existed in absolute darkness that seemed too dense to be natural. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, a tall shadow detached itself from the general blackness. It remained in the doorway, a silhouette darker than the surrounding darkness. Distinctly human in overall shape, but wrong in its proportions. Arms too long, posture too straight, head slightly misshapen. It made no move to enter, merely observed in silence as Daisy's growls transformed into whimpers. I reached for Brendan, only to find his side of the bed empty. Terror crystallized in my veins as I realized he wasn't in the room. My gaze remained locked on the figure in the doorway, unable to look away despite overwhelming fear. Minutes passed in this standoff before heavy footsteps on the stairs broke the spell. The shadow retreated, dissolving back into the hallway darkness as Brendan's voice called up from below. "Everything okay up there? I thought I heard Daisy." When he returned to bed, I pretended to be asleep, unsure how to articulate what I'd witnessed. The next morning, I asked where he'd gone during the night. "Couldn't sleep," he said casually. Went downstairs to read for a while. It was the first direct lie I caught him in, though far from the last. I knew with certainty he had been outside. His side of the bed had been cold, and I'd heard the front door close minutes after he returned. But confronting him seemed impossible, as doubt crept in around the edges of my perception. Was I becoming paranoid? Was the stress of a new relationship affecting my mental health? I began to question my own experiences, a pattern that would become all too familiar in the months ahead. What I didn't understand then was that the house was trying to communicate, to warn me about the man whose family had occupied its spaces for generations. The manifestations weren't meant to frighten me away, but to make me aware of dangers I couldn't yet see. I should have listened sooner. By June, the relationship had transformed in subtle ways that became apparent only in retrospect. Brendan's charming attentiveness morphed into something more controlling. He questioned my whereabouts when we weren't together, expressed concern about certain friendships, and suggested I spend less time with my family, who he claimed didn't understand our connection. These changes occurred so gradually that I barely noticed the tightening constraints around my life. When I did push back, his reactions oscillated between wounded disappointment and cold withdrawal. Emotional responses that made me feel guilty for asserting boundaries. Meanwhile, the activity in the house intensified, following a pattern I gradually discerned. Disturbances peaked during periods of tension between Brendan and me. After our first significant argument, a dispute over my declining a job opportunity he'd arranged without consulting me, the manifestations escalated dramatically. That night, every cabinet door in the kitchen opened simultaneously while we sat in strained silence at the dinner table. The television turned itself on at maximum volume at 2 a.m. The shower activated without human intervention, steam billowing from the bathroom. Brendan's explanation shifted from dismissive reassurance to irritated accusation. "You're doing this for attention," he snapped after the shower incident. "I don't know how, but you're creating these disruptions because you enjoy drama." His denial of objective events I'd witnessed with my own eyes made me question my perception of reality. Was I imagining these occurrences? Was I somehow causing them subconsciously? Daisy remained my only ally in the house. The dog never left my side, maintaining her protective stance whenever unusual phenomena occurred. Her behavior confirmed I wasn't imagining things, providing a grounding presence amid increasing disorientation. Brendan's treatment of Daisy deteriorated as her protective behavior toward me intensified. When she growled at shadowy movements or barked at empty doorways, his response became increasingly violent, shoving her aside, yanking her collar, or locking her outside regardless of weather. "The dog is encouraging your delusions," he said after a particularly frightening evening when multiple lights flickered throughout the house. "She's feeding off your anxiety." One July afternoon, while Brendan was at work, I decided to research the house's history. My search started online, where I discovered newspaper archives mentioning the property. The original structure had burned down in 1938 under suspicious circumstances, according to a brief article. The current house was built in 1940 by Brendan's great-grandparents. Further digging revealed a disturbing pattern. 3 women connected to the property had disappeared over the decades: a housekeeper in 1952, a tenant in 1977, and most recently a girlfriend of Brendan's uncle in 1998. None of the cases were solved, though the investigations noted insufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges. This discovery sent ice through my veins. When I tried to casually mention the house's history to Brendan that evening, his reaction was immediate and severe. "Who have you been talking to?" he demanded, face flushing with anger. Those are malicious rumors spread by jealous neighbors. My family has always been respected in this community. His disproportionate rage confirmed my suspicions that something significant lurked beneath the surface. That night, the house seemed to respond to my newfound knowledge. As I lay beside a sleeping Brendan, the bedroom door slowly opened without human assistance. Standing in the doorway was the now familiar tall figure, more distinct than previous appearances. In the dim light filtering through the curtains, I could make out the outline of formal attire, a suit and what appeared to be an old-fashioned hat. The proportions remained wrong, arms hanging unnaturally low, fingers elongated beyond human dimensions. For the first time, I felt the entity was trying to communicate rather than merely observe. It raised one long-fingered hand, pointing first at Brendan, then at the window, in what seemed like a clear directive: get away from him. I remained frozen, heart thundering in my chest, until Daisy's whimpering from her bed in the corner broke the spell. The figure retreated, dissolving into the hallway darkness as it had done before. The following morning, I found 3 deep scratch marks on the inside of the bedroom door. Marks that hadn't been there the previous day. When I showed them to Brendan, his expression flickered with something that might have been fear before settling into dismissive irritation. Daisy must have done that. I'm getting tired of your constant focus on these imaginary problems. But Daisy's claws couldn't possibly have made those marks. They were too high, too deliberate, and too deeply gouged into the solid wood. They appeared to spell something, though the letters were crude and difficult to decipher. Looking at them from different angles, I eventually made out what seemed to be a roughly carved run. That evening, I secretly contacted Brendan's mother under the pretense of planning a surprise for him. Our conversation started casually, but I gradually steered it toward the house. I've been experiencing some strange things there, I admitted. Unexplainable occurrences. Her response chilled me. The house has always had a presence, she said after a long pause. My parents believed it was my grandparents watching over the family. I felt it too growing up. It never seemed malevolent, more protective, especially toward women in the house. Did anything unusual ever happen to people who lived there? I asked carefully. The extended silence told me more than her eventual response. You should discuss this with Brendan. Every old house has its stories. Her evasion confirmed my growing suspicion. The entity in the house wasn't the threat. It was trying to warn me about Brendan himself. July faded into August, and with the changing season came an escalation in both the supernatural occurrences and Brendan's controlling behavior. He began monitoring my phone, questioning text messages from friends, and suggesting I cut ties with people he deemed negative influences, which increasingly included anyone who showed concern about our relationship. The isolation happened so gradually I barely recognized it happening. Weekend visits with my parents became monthly, then ceased entirely after Brendan manufactured scheduling conflicts or sudden illnesses. Friends stopped reaching out after repeatedly declined invitations. My world contracted until it contained only Brendan, his approved acquaintances, and the increasingly active house. I started keeping a journal hidden in my car, documenting both the paranormal incidents and Brendan's behavior patterns. The act of recording these experiences helped maintain my grasp on reality as he continued to gaslight me about events we both witnessed. One evening in late August, I returned from work to find Brendan in a rage. Daisy had apparently destroyed one of his prized books, a rare first edition his grandfather had collected. The dog cowered in a corner, and Brendan's knuckles were raw in a way that suggested he'd already exacted punishment. That dog is becoming a problem, he said, voice dangerously calm after his initial outburst. I've been patient because you're attached to her, but my generosity has limits. I examined the damaged book later, when Brendan left to meet friends. The pattern of destruction didn't match canine behavior. pages had been deliberately removed and arranged to spell words. Most were torn beyond recognition, but I could make out danger and what looked like basement. That night, while Brendan slept, I crept downstairs with a flashlight. The basement door was always locked, ostensibly due to structural concerns that made the space unsafe. I'd never questioned this explanation, having no reason to access the basement. Now, curiosity and dread compelling me forward, I tried the handle and found it secure. Returning to the kitchen to search for keys, I experienced the most direct intervention yet from the house's presence. A drawer slid open of its own accord, revealing a ring of keys I'd never seen before. As I reached for them, the temperature plummeted so severely that frost formed on the kitchen window despite the summer heat outside. The tall entity materialized more fully than ever before, still shadowy and distorted but undeniably present in the physical space. It stood between me and the basement door, not threatening but warning. One elongated hand extended toward me, then gestured upward, toward the front door, toward escape. Understanding dawned with terrible clarity. Whatever waited in the basement was worse than anything I'd yet discovered. The entity wasn't encouraging investigation, it was urging flight. I replaced the keys and retreated upstairs, newly alert to the danger I'd sensed but denied for months. The next day, I began making preparations to leave, carefully maintaining a facade of normality while gathering essential documents and making arrangements with a former college roommate who lived in another state. September brought cooling temperatures and heightened tension. Brendan's mood swings intensified, veering between excessive affection and cold detachment with alarming unpredictability. He began misplacing my car keys, wallet, and phone with increasing frequency, further restricting my independence. During this period, Daisy became my constant shadow, sleeping pressed against me and growling whenever Brendan approached too quickly. Her protective behavior clearly aggravated him, culminating in an ultimatum. Either the dog goes to a shelter, or she accidentally gets out while you're at work. Your choice. The threat catalyzed my determination to escape. I arranged for a coworker to temporarily house Daisy while finalizing my exit strategy. The night before my planned departure, with Daisy safely away from the house and my essential belongings surreptitiously packed in my car trunk, I experienced the most terrifying manifestation yet. September 17th began like any other day. I went to work, maintained phone contact with Brendan at expected intervals, and returned home with takeout dinner as a peace offering after a manufactured disagreement the previous evening. The normalcy was a carefully constructed illusion, concealing the fact that I planned to leave for good the following morning. Brendan seemed unusually solicitous that evening, opening wine and suggesting we watch a movie together. His attention felt performative, as though he sensed something amiss but couldn't identify the source of his unease. I maintained the charade, acutely aware that discovery of my intentions could provoke dangerous consequences. We retired early, Brendan falling asleep quickly after the wine. I lay awake beside him, mentally reviewing my escape plan while monitoring his breathing. At precisely 2:37 a.m., I was jolted to full alertness by a sharp temperature drop that left my breath visible in the darkness. The bedroom door, closed when we retired, now stood open. Beyond it stretched the hallway, darker than usual despite the nightlight I'd installed weeks earlier to mitigate my fear of that space. The light had failed, or been deliberately extinguished. Something occupied that darkness. Not the tall entity that had appeared previously, but a different presence altogether. Where the familiar figure had seemed to warn and protect, this new manifestation radiated malevolence. It remained just beyond visual confirmation, a suggestion of movement rather than a definite form, circling the perimeter of the doorway like a predator testing boundaries. My muscles locked in primal fear as I sensed it gathering resolve to enter. Beside me, Brendan slept on, oblivious or perhaps deliberately unresponsive. The temperature continued to drop until the bedroom windows frosted over, sealing us in a frozen tableau. When the invasion came, it wasn't the dramatic entrance I expected, but a subtle infiltration. Darkness from the hallway seemed to flow into the room like liquid shadow, pooling at the foot of the bed before gradually extending tendrils toward my immobilized form. I tried to scream, to wake Brendan, to move, anything to disrupt the horrifying progression, but found myself in the grip of sleep paralysis, conscious but physically powerless. The shadow reached me, making contact with my exposed ankle. The sensation wasn't tactile but emotional. Instant, overwhelming despair flooded my consciousness, accompanied by vivid images of women I didn't recognize. Their faces appeared in rapid succession, expressions frozen in terror and betrayal. Somehow I understood these were previous occupants of the house, women who had been connected to Brendan's family. The psychic assault continued as the shadow entity enveloped more of my body, each point of contact revealing new horrors, glimpses of violence, of blood-stained basement walls, of freshly disturbed earth in the wooded area behind the property. These weren't imagined scenarios, but memories, impressed upon the house by traumatic events and now transmitted to me with terrible clarity. Just as the shadow reached my chest, threatening to suffocate me with accumulated dread, a counterforce manifested. The familiar tall entity appeared at the bedroom doorway, more substantial than I'd ever seen it. In the ambient light, I could discern features previously hidden, an aged face with deeply sorrowful eyes beneath the brim of an old-fashioned hat. This was no malevolent spirit, but a guardian, somehow bound to the house and its tragic history. A silent conflict ensued between the two presences, light against darkness, protection against malice. The shadow retreated incrementally, forced back by the tall entity's intervention. As it withdrew, my paralysis gradually lifted, allowing me to draw a desperate breath and finally move my limbs. Beside me, Brendan remained motionless, but I now recognized his stillness as deliberate rather than the natural posture of sleep. His breathing pattern betrayed consciousness. He was awake, aware of the supernatural confrontation, and choosing to feign sleep rather than acknowledge it. The tall entity gestured urgently toward the door once the shadow had been banished to the hallway. The message was unmistakable. This was my opportunity to escape. I slid from the bed carefully, heart hammering with the certainty that Brendan was monitoring my movements despite his closed eyes. I grabbed the pre-packed overnight bag from beneath the bed, backing toward the door while maintaining visual contact with Brendan's sleeping form. The tall entity stood aside, creating a path through the doorway that avoided the lingering patches of shadow still occupying portions of the hallway. Just as I reached the threshold, Brendan's eyes snapped open. The pretense abandoned, he fixed me with a gaze of such calculated malice that I momentarily froze in shock. This wasn't the man I thought I knew. The mask had dropped completely, revealing something predatory and inhuman. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, voice unnaturally calm despite the fury evident in his expression. "I forgot something in my car," I lied, clutching my bag tighter. "I'll be right back." "At 3 a.m, with a packed bag?" He rose slowly, deliberately, like a cobra preparing to strike. "I don't think so." What happened next occurred with such speed that details blurred in my memory. Brendan lunged toward me just as the tall entity interposed itself between us. A blast of frigid air filled the room, powerful enough to momentarily blind Brendan and push him backward. Every light in the house activated simultaneously, bulbs burning with unnatural brightness before exploding in quick succession. In the chaos, I bolted down the stairs and toward the front door. Behind me, Brendan's enraged shouts competed with sounds no human throat could produce, unearthly wailing that seemed to emanate from the house itself. The front door, always difficult to open, swung wide before I reached it, offering a path to freedom I didn't hesitate to take. I ran to my car, fumbling with keys as Brendan appeared in the doorway. His face, illuminated by exterior security lights, displayed a rage beyond rational human emotion. He started toward me just as my engine roared to life. As I accelerated away, the last image in my rearview mirror was of Brendan standing in the street, the tall, shadowy guardian visible behind him in the doorway. Even at a distance, I could see Brendan's expression shift from rage to fear as he sensed the presence at his back. I drove through the night to my coworker's house, collected Daisy, and continued to the state line before stopping at a motel. Only then, with hundreds of miles between us and multiple text messages from Brendan alternating between threats and pleas, did I allow myself to process what had occurred. The weeks following my escape were a blur of protective measures and gradual recovery. I relocated to a different state, staying with my former roommate while establishing a new identity and securing employment. Legal protection proved challenging. Restraining orders require a current address, which I couldn't provide without compromising my safety. Brendan's initial reaction followed predictable patterns of abusive behavior, alternating between rage, manipulation, and apparent remorse in messages sent to every contact method available. When these received no response, he evolved to more concerning tactics, contacting my family with fabricated emergencies, creating false social media accounts to track my movements, and eventually enlisting mutual acquaintances to check on my well-being. Throughout this period, I experienced no further supernatural manifestations. Whatever entities inhabited Brendan's house remained bound to that location, their ability to warn or threaten limited to the property itself. Yet their impact lingered in my psyche, prompting nightmares and episodes of hypervigilance that a therapist later diagnosed as PTSD. 3 months after my departure, curiosity and a need for closure drove me to research Brendan's family history more thoroughly. Working from public libraries using anonymous browsing sessions, I pieced together a disturbing generational pattern. The property had passed through male heirs for 4 generations, each inheriting not just the house, but apparent immunity from legal consequences. Police reports spanning decades revealed multiple domestic violence calls, missing persons investigations, and even a murder inquiry, all eventually abandoned due to insufficient evidence or departmental resource limitations. Local newspaper archives provided context through carefully worded articles that suggested corruption without directly alleging it. Brendan's grandfather had been a prominent judge. His father served on the city council before relocating to Arizona. The family maintained deep connections throughout local government and law enforcement, creating a protective infrastructure that had apparently shielded multiple generations from accountability. Most disturbing were the similarities between cases involving different family members across decades. Women disappeared after reporting abuse. Evidence mysteriously vanished from police custody. Witnesses recanted statements or relocated without explanation. The pattern was clear to anyone examining the full historical record, yet no single authority had apparently connected these dots. 6 months after my escape, I received an unexpected email from Brendan's mother, sent to an account I rarely used and had forgotten to deactivate. The message was brief but revelatory. I hope you're safe wherever you are. I won't ask for your location or contact Brendan about this communication. I just wanted you to know that the house is being demolished next month. After what happened to you and others before you, I finally convinced the family it's time to let go of that property. Some places absorb the evil done within them until they become vessels for continued harm. Be well, and please don't respond to this message. The validation provided by her acknowledgement, however oblique, of others before you, helped solidify my understanding of what I'd experienced. The house hadn't been haunted by malevolent spirits. It had absorbed and manifested the psychic trauma inflicted within its walls by generations of abuse. The tall entity, which I'd come to believe was the residual energy of a previous victim, rather than a conventional ghost, had used whatever limited agency it possessed to warn me away from Brendan's predatory behavior. The shadow presence that attacked during my final night represented the accumulated malice of Brendan's patrilineage, a darkness that had potentially influenced or amplified his inherent tendencies. Through therapy and distance, I gradually reconstructed my sense of reality. The gaslighting I'd endured, both from Brendan's deliberate manipulation and from genuine supernatural occurrences that defied rational explanation, had damaged my ability to trust my own perceptions. Rebuilding this foundation proved more challenging than establishing physical safety. In December, I received another unexpected communication, this time from local police in Brendan's hometown. A detective requested an interview regarding historical cases connected to the property. With my therapist's support, I agreed to a phone conversation conducted through anonymous channels. The detective, a woman recently transferred from another jurisdiction, had initiated a review of cold cases connected to the address after the demolition permit raised flags in their system. Free from the influence networks that had previously protected the family, she had identified 7 potential victims over 3 generations. "We don't expect to solve all these cases," she explained with professional candor, "but we're building a pattern of behavior profile that might help protect others in the future." Brendan has relocated to join his father in Arizona, but these types rarely change their fundamental nature. We didn't discuss what happened at Moss Glen Falls when we returned to campus that night. By unspoken agreement, we separated at the dormitory entrance with mumbled goodbyes, each retreating to process the experience alone. In the days that followed, Jasmine and I tried to rationalize what we had encountered. We researched local wildlife, hunting forums, even Vermont folklore, searching for some explanation that would fit within our understanding of reality. "Maybe it was sick," Jasmine suggested during one of our attempts at discussion. "Chronic wasting disease can make deer behave strangely. CWD doesn't make deer stand on hind legs or mimic cat sounds," I countered. "There's no disease that explains what we saw." We considered other possibilities: an elaborate prank by local teenagers, a wildlife monitoring robot gone haywire, even shared hallucination brought on by toxic fungi we might have inadvertently touched. None of these explanations satisfied either of us, but they were preferable to accepting what our experience suggested: that something existed in those Vermont woods that defied natural law. Jasmine transferred to a university in Connecticut the following semester. We maintained contact for a while through text messages and social media, but our communications were always strained, shadowed by the unspoken memory of what we had witnessed together. Eventually, we drifted apart, as if the bond forged by our shared experience was too painful to maintain. I remained at the University of Vermont, completing my degree, but I never returned to Moss Glen Falls. In fact, I found myself avoiding forests altogether, choosing urban parks for exercise, taking longer routes on highways rather than scenic drives through wooded areas. When friends suggested hiking trips, I invented excuses: too much homework, a previous commitment, a sudden headache. The incident changed me in subtle but profound ways. I became hyper-vigilant in natural settings, constantly scanning tree lines for movement, startling at unexpected sounds. My sleep was frequently disturbed by nightmares featuring those glowing eyes, that unnatural laughter. I developed a particular aversion to deer, unable to view even the most innocuous roadside doe without my heart rate accelerating. After graduation, I moved to Pennsylvania for work, a deliberate choice to distance myself from Vermont's expansive forests. My apartment in Philadelphia is surrounded by concrete and steel, the nearest substantial wooded area miles away. This brings me comfort in ways I find difficult to explain to others. I've attempted to research similar encounters over the years, spending countless hours on obscure forums and websites dedicated to unexplained phenomena. Occasionally, I find accounts that echo elements of our experience: unusual animal behavior, strange sounds in remote forests, momentary glimpses of things that shouldn't exist. Most are easily dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications, but some contain details too specific, too similar to what we witnessed to be coincidence. 4 years have passed since that day at Moss Glen Falls. I've largely rebuilt my life, created a version of normality that doesn't include frequent thoughts of what happened. I've even begun dating someone who enjoys outdoor activities, though I carefully steer our excursions toward open fields and beaches rather than forests. But sometimes, in the moments between wakefulness and sleep, I find myself back on that dark trail, face to face with something wearing the shape of a deer but fundamentally other. In those moments, the carefully constructed rational explanations fall away, and I'm left with the terrifying possibility that what we encountered was something beyond our current understanding, something that exists in the shadows between what we know and what we fear. I still receive occasional texts from Jasmine, usually around the anniversary of our encounter. Brief messages checking that I'm okay, that I haven't returned to Moss Glen. I always respond with reassurances, never mentioning that I sometimes hear that distorted cat sound in perfectly ordinary situations, a radio being tuned, static on a phone call, the particular cry of certain birds at dusk. Whatever we encountered that day, it left an indelible mark on both of us. Not a physical scar, but something deeper, a fracture in our understanding of what is possible, what is real. A reminder that perhaps the ancient human fear of dark forests isn't merely cultural superstition but evolutionary wisdom. I'm sharing this account not to frighten you, but as a warning. Most of Vermont's wilderness is exactly what it appears to be. Beautiful, peaceful, worthy of respect but not fear. But there are places, moments, where something else bleeds through, where the boundaries between what should exist and what does exist become dangerously thin. If you find yourself on a forest trail as darkness falls, and you hear sounds that shouldn't be there, laughter where there should be none, animal calls that sound almost but not quite right, don't investigate, don't seek proof, turn around, return to safety, and count yourself fortunate, because some knowledge comes at too high a price. Some encounters leave shadows that never fully fade. And some creatures that walk in the Vermont woods were never meant to be understood by human minds. Brendan himself received a 10-year sentence for his assault on the Arizona girlfriend, with additional charges pending as investigators link him to historical cases. His father committed suicide before arrest, while other family members have made plea agreements exchanging information for reduced sentences. The generational cycle of protected violence has finally been broken. I've relocated permanently to the Pacific Northwest, finding unexpected healing in misty forests and rugged coastlines so different from the suburban landscape where my trauma occurred. Daisy remains my constant companion, now showing her age with graying muzzle, but still occasionally alert to things invisible to human perception. My therapeutic journey evolved from crisis management to deeper integration of my experiences. The question that once consumed me, were the manifestations objectively real or psychological responses to danger, eventually lost its urgency. The distinction matters less than what they represented. Warnings I initially ignored, but eventually heeded in time to save myself. I've connected with 2 other survivors of Brendan's family, women who escaped earlier generations with similar stories of unexplainable occurrences in that house. Our shared experiences, spanning decades but containing striking similarities, have helped each of us validate memories that others might dismiss as delusion or exaggeration. One woman, now in her 70s, had briefly dated Brendan's grandfather in the 1960s. Her description of a protective presence that seemed to move objects and create cold spots matches my experiences with remarkable precision. I always believed it was his first wife, she told me during our first conversation. The one they claimed moved to Florida, but no one ever heard from again. These connections have helped transform my trauma into something meaningful, not merely survived but understood within a larger context of intergenerational harm and resistance. Whatever entity occupied that house, whether actual spirit or manifested psychic energy, represented a refusal to let violence remain hidden, a determination that future victims should be warned. I still have nightmares occasionally. In the worst of them, I never leave that house. I become one of the women under the basement floor, forgotten except as energy imprinted on the structure itself. I wake from these dreams with racing heart, but also profound gratitude for the intervention that prevented this outcome. My professional life has taken unexpected direction into victim advocacy, working specifically with survivors of domestic violence who encounter skepticism when reporting early warning signs. I've become adept at helping others recognize patterns of isolation and reality distortion before they escalate to physical danger. Without sharing supernatural elements that might undermine credibility, I teach others to trust the intuitive unease that signals danger before conscious mind can articulate it. The demolished property remains vacant, development proposals repeatedly abandoned after initial enthusiasm. Local rumors suggest construction crews experience equipment failures, unexplained accidents, and overwhelming dread that forces project termination. The town council recently approved conversion to a memorial garden dedicated to missing women, an outcome I find appropriately respectful of what transpired there. I've visited this garden once, standing at its perimeter rather than entering the grounds themselves. Nothing supernatural manifested during this pilgrimage. No temperature drops, no shadowy figures, no meaningful coincidences. The evil that saturated that location appears to have dissipated with the structure's destruction and the advancing justice process. What remains instead is ordinary grief for lives lost, potential unrealized, futures stolen by predatory men protected by systems designed to shield them. This grief feels clean compared to the toxic fear that once characterized my relationship with that space. A natural human response rather than supernatural warning. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened in Brendan's house. Perhaps some combination of actual paranormal activity and heightened intuitive awareness created the experiences I've described. Perhaps trauma from previous victims somehow imprinted itself on the physical structure in ways science hasn't yet explained. Perhaps the mind, recognizing danger the conscious self refuses to acknowledge, creates metaphorical manifestations to communicate warning. The precise mechanism matters less than the ultimate truth. Something tried to warn me, I eventually listened, and that decision saved my life. This understanding has expanded my perspective on reality itself, not abandoning rationality but recognizing its limitations in explaining human experience. Some truths reveal themselves through channels beyond conventional understanding. Daisy passed away peacefully last winter, 13 years of loyal companionship completed. In her final weeks, she would sometimes stare intently at empty corners of our home, tail wagging in recognition of something beyond my perception. I choose to believe she saw the protective presence that followed us from Brendan's house, not to haunt, but to ensure our continued safety. The night after her passing, I awoke to the distinct sensation of weight settling at the foot of my bed, the exact pressure and position where she had slept for years. It remained briefly before gradually fading. Science would explain this as grief manifesting through tactile hallucination. Perhaps that's all it was. But my experiences have taught me that reality contains more possibilities than conventional wisdom acknowledges. Some connections transcend physical boundaries. Some warnings arrive through channels we lack language to properly describe. Some protectors remain vigilant beyond what rational frameworks can explain. I've learned to live comfortably in this expanded understanding, maintaining healthy skepticism while remaining open to experiences beyond immediate explanation. The world is stranger and more wondrous than I once believed. Filled with dangers, yes, but also with interventions that arrive precisely when needed most. My story isn't merely one of survival, but of fundamental transformation. Not just escaping a dangerous man, but escaping limited perception of what constitutes reality. The house showed me horrors, but it also revealed possibilities I might otherwise never have recognized. For that paradoxical gift, despite everything that preceded it, I remain grateful. I never truly believed in ghosts until that summer at my grandmother's house. The year was 2018, and I was 15 years old. Old enough to know better, but young enough to be terrified by the unknown. My cousin Bella and I had always been drawn to horror. Our fascination began innocently enough with campfire stories and Halloween traditions, but gradually evolved into an obsession with anything that sent shivers through our bodies. We devoured horror films, spent hours discussing creepypastas, and collected books about hauntings and supernatural phenomena. My mother disapproved of our macabre interests. Our family was deeply Catholic. Sunday Mass was non-negotiable, and religious iconography adorned every room of our home. She blamed my persistent nightmares on the horror films, but I knew better. The vivid depictions of eternal damnation from Sunday school terrified me far more than any slasher film. Grandmother Catherine was different. Despite her religious devotion, she indulged our fascination with the supernatural. Her Victorian-style house on the outskirts of town was the perfect setting for our ghost stories: creaking floorboards, whistling drafts through ancient windows, and shadows that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. "The house remembers," she would say cryptically when we asked about strange noises or flickering lights. One evening, as thunder rumbled in the distance, Grandmother settled into her worn armchair and told us about an antique Ouija board she'd purchased decades ago for my aunt's 16th birthday. "That thing brought nothing but trouble," she said, her weathered hands clutching her rosary beads. "Had to have a woman from town come look at it, someone who knew about such things." "A witch?" Bella asked, her eyes widening. Grandmother's lips tightened. I wouldn't use that word. But she understood things beyond our comprehension. She told me never to destroy it. That would only make matters worse. So I locked it away in the attic storage room. The attic. That mysterious space above our heads, accessible only by a pull-down ladder in the hallway. It was divided into two sections: a finished bedroom area with twin beds where Bella and I sometimes slept during extended visits, and a storage section sealed off by a small wooden door with a sliding lock. We pleaded for Grandmother to show us the Ouija board, but she refused. "Some doors are better left closed," she said, ending the conversation. That night, lying in bed, I wondered what other secrets the house contained. Little did I know I would soon find out. The incident happened the following day. It was unusually hot for June, the kind of oppressive heat that makes the air feel thick and time move sluggishly. Bella and I had spent the morning running through the sprinklers on Grandmother's patchy lawn before retreating indoors to escape the midday sun. Grandmother was in her usual spot in the living room, watching Judge Judy with unwavering attention. The familiar sound of the television judge's sharp reprimands provided a soundtrack to our childhood summers. We grabbed popsicles from the freezer and headed to the back room where we could watch our own programs. The back room was cooler than the rest of the house, with heavy curtains blocking out the harsh sunlight. A faded couch faced an old television set atop a wooden cabinet. Religious imagery adorned the walls, depictions of saints, the Virgin Mary, and several crucifixes of varying sizes. We flipped through channels until we found a documentary about exorcisms. The dramatic reenactments showed priests battling invisible forces while possessed victims contorted unnaturally. Bella and I sat transfixed, our melting popsicles forgotten. The program detailed a particularly disturbing case when a strange sound interrupted our viewing. A slow, deliberate scraping against the wall beside us. I froze, my eyes darting to Bella's. She had heard it too. The noise continued, a grating, methodical sound like fingernails dragging across plaster. We both turned toward its source. A modest wooden crucifix hanging on the wall about 5 feet off the ground. What happened next defies rational explanation. The cross began to rotate, slowly at first, then picking up speed. It wasn't falling, it was turning in place, as if an invisible hand was manipulating it. The movement was deliberate, purposeful. When it finally stopped, the crucifix hung perfectly inverted, Christ's suffering figure positioned upside down. Time seemed suspended. Neither of us breathed. The television continued its narration about demonic forces, now a taunting backdrop to our real-life horror. Bella screamed first, breaking the spell that had momentarily paralyzed us. We bolted from the room, nearly colliding with each other in our desperation to escape. We ran to Grandmother, words tumbling out incoherently as we tried to explain what we'd witnessed. Grandmother's skeptical expression didn't waver as she rose from her recliner and followed us back to the room. By the time we returned, the crucifix lay on the floor, looking innocuous against the worn carpet. "Girls," Grandmother said, picking up the cross and examining it. This was attached with adhesive putty. It couldn't possibly have turned itself around. It would have fallen immediately. "But we saw it," Bella insisted, her voice rising with frustration. "It turned all the way around, Grandma. It hung upside down." Grandmother studied our terrified faces. Something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Fear? Whatever it was, she quickly concealed it. "You've been watching those frightening programs again," she said dismissively. "Your imaginations are running wild." She reattached the crucifix to the wall, pressing the blue putty firmly into place. "Remember what Father Thomas says about idle minds," she added before returning to her program, effectively ending the discussion. Bella and I exchanged glances. We both knew what we'd seen. And we both knew somehow that Grandmother didn't believe her own explanation. That night, I dreamed of upside-down crosses covering every surface of the house, spinning like propellers, cutting through the air as I tried to escape them. For several days following the incident, Bella and I were jumpy and irritable. We avoided the back room and kept our horror viewing to a minimum. Gradually, as nothing further occurred, we began to rationalize what we'd seen. Perhaps a draft had dislodged the crucifix, and our horror-primed minds had filled in the details. But deep down, I knew better. The crucifix hadn't simply fallen. It had rotated with intention, with malice. About a week later, Grandmother announced she needed to run errands in town. With our parents at work, we would have the house to ourselves for several hours. Any other teenagers might have celebrated this freedom, but Bella and I felt a creeping unease at the prospect. "We could go to the park," Bella suggested half-heartedly as Grandmother's car disappeared down the driveway. I shook my head. "It's too hot." In truth, I felt compelled to stay in the house. Something was unfinished, unresolved. We spent the morning watching benign television programs and playing card games at the kitchen table. Around noon, we made sandwiches and ate them in relative silence, the ticking of Grandmother's antique wall clock marking the passage of time with metronomic precision. "Do you think there's really a Ouija board in the attic?" Bella asked suddenly, breaking the silence. I nearly choked on my sandwich. "Probably. Grandma wouldn't lie about something like that. Don't you want to see it?" The question hung between us. Of course I wanted to see it. The forbidden nature of the object made it irresistible, but I also understood, perhaps better than Bella, that some boundaries existed for good reason. "Grandma would kill us," I said weakly. Bella's eyes glinted with mischief. "She won't be back for hours. We'll just take a quick look and put everything back exactly as we found it." My internal warning system flashed red. Every horror film we'd ever watched had taught us that investigating strange phenomena alone was the fastest route to disaster. And yet, I found myself nodding in agreement. We finished our lunch and cleaned up meticulously, as if demonstrating our responsibility might somehow offset our planned transgression. Then, hearts pounding, we made our way to the hallway where the attic entrance waited. The pull-down ladder descended with a protesting creak when Bella tugged its cord. Dust particles danced in the shaft of light from the hallway window, creating an ethereal pathway up to the darkened space above. "After you," Bella said, suddenly less confident. I swallowed hard and began climbing. Each rung felt like a decision point, a chance to reconsider, to retreat to safety. But curiosity pushed me upward until I emerged in the dim attic space. The temperature change was immediate. While the house below was comfortably cool from central air conditioning, the attic was stifling, the air dense and difficult to breathe. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I stepped aside to make room for Bella. The bedroom portion of the attic was sparsely furnished with twin beds covered in faded quilts, a small nightstand between them, and a battery-operated lamp that cast weak yellow light when I switched it on. A slanted ceiling made the space feel even more confined, and a small window at the far end was obscured by years of grime. But it was the wooden door separating us from the storage area that drew our attention. It seemed smaller than I remembered, barely 5 feet high, with a simple sliding wooden lock securing it. "Do you think it's in there?" Bella whispered, though there was no need for hushed tones in the empty house. "Only one way to find out," I replied, moving toward the door with a confidence I didn't feel. The wooden lock slid open easily, but the door itself resisted, swollen from years of heat and humidity. I had to push with my shoulder before it finally gave way with a sound like a gasping breath. The storage section was pitch black. I fumbled for my phone to activate its flashlight, revealing a space cluttered with cardboard boxes, old furniture, and plastic bins filled with seasonal decorations. Cobwebs adorned every surface, and the dust was so thick it felt like powder beneath our feet. "We're looking for a Ouija board," I reminded Bella, who had gone very quiet beside me. "Probably in a box." We moved carefully through the cramped space, checking labels on boxes when they existed, opening those that seemed promising. Most contained predictable items: Christmas ornaments, old clothing, photo albums. After 20 minutes of searching, frustration began to replace our initial trepidation. The stifling heat made it difficult to think, and the dust irritated my eyes and throat. "Maybe she got rid of it," Bella suggested, wiping sweat from her brow. "Or maybe it's not here at all. Adults make up stories sometimes." I was about to agree when my flashlight beam caught something in the far corner, a trunk unlike the other storage containers. It was made of dark wood with metal fixtures, the kind you might see in a period film about ocean voyages. Unlike everything else in the attic, it appeared untouched by dust. "Look," I whispered, pointing. We approached the trunk cautiously. No lock secured its heavy lid, just a simple metal latch that lifted with minimal effort. The hinges moved silently, suspiciously well-oiled compared to everything else in the house. Inside, resting on what appeared to be a black velvet cloth, was a Ouija board. Not the mass-produced Parker Brothers version I'd expected, but something that looked handcrafted. The wood was dark and polished, the letters carved rather than painted, and the planchette was made of some kind of bone, yellowed with age. "Should we touch it?" Bella asked, her voice barely audible. Before I could respond, a sound reached us from below, a door closing. We froze, eyes wide with panic. "Is Grandma home early?" Bella hissed. I checked my phone. "She shouldn't be back for another hour at least." We listened intently. Footsteps moved through the house below, deliberate, heavy steps that didn't match grandmother's light tread. They crossed the living room, entered the kitchen, then proceeded to the hallway directly beneath the attic entrance. They stopped. Bella clutched my arm, her nails digging painfully into my skin. I barely noticed, every fiber of my being focused on the silence that now seemed louder than any noise. Then, unmistakably, the footsteps began ascending the pull-down ladder. "Hide!" I whispered urgently, pulling Bella deeper into the storage area. We crouched behind a stack of boxes, still in view of the small doorway connecting to the bedroom area of the attic. My pulse hammered in my ears as we waited for whoever, or whatever, was climbing the ladder. The footsteps reached the top of the ladder, then stopped. Long seconds passed with no further sound or movement. Had I imagined it? Was my horror-saturated mind manufacturing threats from ordinary household noises? Just as I began to relax slightly, thinking perhaps it had been the house settling or the air conditioning cycling on, a shadow fell across the attic bedroom floor, visible through the open storage room door. Someone was standing at the top of the ladder, just out of our sight. Bella's breathing grew shallow and rapid beside me. I squeezed her hand in warning, praying she wouldn't make a sound. We had left the trunk open, the Ouija board fully exposed. If grandmother had returned early and discovered our trespass, we would be in serious trouble. But something told me it wasn't grandmother waiting in the shadows. The temperature in the already stifling attic plummeted suddenly. My breath emerged in visible puffs, and goosebumps rose on my arms despite the summer heat outside. The drastic change was impossible, unnatural. The shadow in the bedroom area moved, gliding across the floor without the accompanying sound of footsteps. It paused at the threshold of the storage room door. I bit my lip hard enough to draw blood, fighting the scream building in my throat. Bella trembled violently beside me, her eyes squeezed shut in terror. A low humming filled the air. Not mechanical like an electrical appliance, but almost musical, like someone singing without words. The melody, if it could be called that, followed no pattern I recognized. It rose and fell erratically, sometimes so low it was nearly inaudible, other times piercing enough to make my ears ache. The shadow retreated from the doorway, moving back toward the attic bedroom. The humming faded with it. Time passed. I couldn't say how much. We remained frozen, afraid to move, to breathe. Eventually, I summoned the courage to peer around the stack of boxes toward the open storage room door. The bedroom area appeared empty. No shadow. No presence. "I think it's gone," I whispered. No sooner had the words left my mouth than every box in the storage room shifted simultaneously, sliding several inches across the floor with a sound like tearing fabric. Bella screamed then, a high, thin sound of pure terror that cut through the unnatural silence. I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the door, no longer caring about stealth or discovery. We had to get out. We burst through the storage room door into the bedroom area, expecting to confront whatever had created the shadow. But the space was empty, the ladder to the hallway below still extended and waiting. "Go!" I urged Bella, pushing her toward the exit. She scrambled down the ladder with me close behind. As my foot hit the last rung, I glanced up just in time to see the small wooden storage room door slam shut with violent force. We ran through the house, not stopping until we reached the front porch. The summer afternoon was blindingly bright after the darkness of the attic, the normality of the suburban street almost shocking in contrast to what we'd just experienced. "What was that?" Bella gasped, doubled over and gulping air. I shook my head, unable to form words around the fear still gripping my throat. "We need to close the attic," I finally managed, "before Grandma gets home." The thought of returning to the house, let alone the attic, made my stomach lurch. But leaving evidence of our exploration would only complicate an already terrifying situation. "I'll do it," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "You stay here and watch for Grandma's car." Before Bella could protest, I forced myself back into the house. The interior seemed different somehow. The familiar rooms transformed by the knowledge that something else occupied this space with us. I approached the attic ladder cautiously, half expecting to see a figure descending. When nothing appeared, I quickly pushed the ladder up and closed the trapdoor, securing it in place. As the latch clicked shut, a wave of relief washed over me. Whatever had been up there was now contained, separated from us by layers of wood and insulation. I returned to Bella on the porch, and we silently agreed not to discuss what had happened. Not with each other, not with grandmother, not with anyone. Some experiences defy explanation, and forcing them into words only diminishes their reality. When grandmother returned 30 minutes later, she found us sitting innocently on the porch swing, reading magazines and pretending our world hadn't fundamentally changed. The remainder of the day passed in strained normalcy. We helped grandmother prepare dinner, watched her favorite evening programs, and participated in conversation without revealing the tremor of fear that underscored our every action. When bedtime arrived, Bella and I faced a dilemma. We typically slept in the attic bedroom during summer visits, but after our experience, the thought was unbearable. yet explaining our reluctance would require confessions we weren't prepared to make. "You girls look exhausted," Grandmother remarked as she cleared the dinner dishes. "Must be all that sun you got yesterday. Why don't you sleep in the guest room tonight instead of climbing all those stairs?" The relief was so intense I nearly cried. Whether Grandmother somehow sensed our unspoken distress or coincidence had worked in our favor, I didn't question the reprieve. The guest room on the main floor had a queen-sized bed that Bella and I would share, surrounded by more of Grandmother's religious artifacts. Typically, I found the watchful eyes of painted saints unsettling, but tonight they seemed like guardians against whatever lurked in the attic. We prepared for bed in silence, the weight of our shared experience hanging between us like an invisible curtain. As we settled beneath the covers, Bella finally spoke. "What do you think it was?" she whispered. I stared at the ceiling, considering my answer carefully. "I don't know. Maybe nothing. Old houses make strange noises." "That wasn't just a noise, and you know it," Bella insisted. "There was something up there with us." I couldn't argue with her perception. We had both seen the shadow, felt the impossible cold, heard the humming that no human throat could produce. "Whatever it was," I said, "it's connected to that Ouija board. We should never have opened that trunk." Bella nodded solemnly. "Do you think we released something?" The question hung in the darkness between us, too terrifying to contemplate directly. Horror movies had taught us the rules. Tampering with occult objects invites unwelcome entities into our world. Had we inadvertently crossed that threshold? "Let's just try to sleep," I suggested, though sleep seemed an unlikely prospect. "Everything will seem more rational in the morning." We said goodnight and attempted to rest, but every house sound, the refrigerator cycling on, the heating ducts expanding, the subtle settling of an aging structure, now carried sinister undertones. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, listening to Bella's breathing gradually slow and deepen as exhaustion finally claimed her. My own consciousness hovered at the edge of sleep when a new sound registered, a soft, rhythmic tapping. At first I thought it might be a branch against the window, but the night was still, without even a whisper of wind. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from above, from the attic. I told myself it was my imagination, a continuation of the day's terror bleeding into the threshold of dreams. But as the tapping persisted, growing slightly louder, slightly faster, the possibility of denial evaporated. Tap, 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 tap. It had a pattern now, a deliberate rhythm that suggested communication. I lay frozen, afraid that any movement might attract attention from whatever was creating the sound. Beside me, Bella stirred but didn't wake. I envied her oblivion, the temporary escape that sleep provided. The tapping stopped abruptly, leaving a silence more unnerving than the noise had been. I strained to hear, holding my breath to eliminate even that small disruption. A different sound replaced the tapping, the unmistakable creak of the attic ladder being lowered. My blood turned to ice. We had secured the trap door before coming downstairs. There was no one else in the house who could be accessing the attic. Grandmother slept at the opposite end of the house, her bedroom door closed as always. The creak was followed by the soft thud of footfalls on the ladder. Something was descending into the hallway. I wanted to wake Bella, to share the renewed terror. But self-preservation kept me motionless, hardly breathing. The bedroom door was closed but not locked, an oversight that now seemed catastrophic. The footsteps moved down the hallway, past our door toward the living room. Then, after a pause, they returned, stopping directly outside the guest room. The doorknob turned slowly, the mechanisms click unnaturally loud in the silent house. The door opened a crack, allowing a sliver of darkness deeper than the bedroom's shadows to spill onto the floor. I squeezed my eyes shut, an instinctive but futile defense. Cold air washed over my face, carrying a scent I couldn't identify, something ancient and musty, like books left too long in a damp basement. The temperature in the room plummeted just as it had in the attic earlier. Something entered the room. Though my eyes remained closed, I sensed movement near the foot of the bed, a presence that carried weight and intention. The humming began again, that same discordant melody that defied musical convention. I wanted to scream, to run, to fight. Anything but lie helplessly as the intruder approached. But terror had paralyzed me completely. The mattress depressed slightly near my feet, as if someone had sat down. The humming stopped. Then a voice, neither male nor female, neither young nor old, spoke a single word. Soon. The pressure on the mattress released. Footsteps retreated across the room, through the door, down the hallway. The attic ladder creaked as it was ascended, then the muffled sound of the trapdoor closing. Only then did I finally succumb to the darkness pulling at the edges of my consciousness, fainting rather than sleeping, my mind retreating from a reality it couldn't process. I woke to sunlight streaming through the guest room window, and Bella shaking my shoulder urgently. "Wake up! Grandma's been calling us for breakfast for 10 minutes. I blinked, disoriented. The terror of the night seemed distant in the morning light, like a nightmare dissolving upon waking. Had it been just that, a dream born of stress and suggestion? Bella appeared normally rested, showing no signs of shared trauma. "Come on, she made waffles," she said, already heading for the door. I sat up slowly, cataloging sensations. The room was warm, pleasant. No lingering cold, no musty scent. The door stood ajar as Bella had left it, showing the hallway beyond. Ordinary, unthreatening. Maybe it had been a dream. I dressed quickly and joined Grandmother and Bella in the kitchen. The familiar scene, Grandmother at the waffle iron, orange juice in glass tumblers, the radio playing softly, offered comforting normalcy. "There she is," Grandmother said, smiling. "I was beginning to think you'd sleep all day." I mumbled an apology and took my place at the table, avoiding the questioning look Bella shot me. "Did you girls sleep well?" Grandmother asked, setting a plate of waffles before me. "No bad dreams, I hope?" The question seemed loaded, almost knowing. I studied her face for signs she suspected our attic exploration, but saw only gentle concern. "I slept great," Bella said, drowning her waffles in syrup. "Best night in ages." All eyes turned to me, awaiting my response. "Fine," I managed. "Just vivid dreams." Grandmother nodded, returning to the waffle iron. "This house gives everyone vivid dreams. Something about the air, perhaps." The casual remark carried weight beyond its simplicity. Was Grandmother acknowledging something about the house? Had she experienced similar phenomena? Breakfast continued without further discussion of sleep or dreams. Grandmother mentioned plans to visit a friend in the afternoon, which would again leave Bella and me alone in the house. "Maybe we could go to the mall?" I suggested quickly, the thought of being in the house without Grandmother suddenly terrifying. Bella readily agreed, and Grandmother offered to drop us off on her way to her friend's home. The plan was settled, and with it, a temporary escape from the house and its secrets. After breakfast, while Grandmother showered, Bella cornered me in the living room. "What happened last night?" she demanded. "You look awful." I hesitated, uncertain whether sharing my experience would help or simply spread the terror. "I had a nightmare," I said finally. "About the attic." Bella's expression grew serious. "Just a nightmare, or something else?" The question cut to the heart of my uncertainty. How does one distinguish between nightmare and visitation when both occupy the same shadowy realm of consciousness? "I don't know," I admitted. It felt real. Something came into our room. It sat on the bed and spoke to me. "What did it say?" Bella whispered, her eyes wide. Just one word. Soon. Bella shivered despite the warm morning. We need to tell Grandma what we found in the attic. I shook my head emphatically. We can't. She'll know we were snooping where we shouldn't have been. Besides, what would we say? That we might have awakened something supernatural? She'll think we're making it up. Then what do we do? It was the essential question, one that horror movie protagonists inevitably face after initial encounters with the unexplained. In films, they typically make the wrong choice, investigating further rather than fleeing, separating rather than staying together, keeping secrets rather than seeking help. We stay away from the attic, I said firmly. We don't talk about the Ouija board. We pretend none of it happened. In 3 days, our parents will pick us up and we'll go home. Bella didn't look convinced, but she nodded reluctantly. 3 days. We can manage that. The mall provided welcome distraction. Bright lights, crowds of normal teenagers, the comforting background noise of commerce and conversation. We wandered from store to store, tried on clothes we couldn't afford, and sat in the food court longer than necessary, delaying our return to Grandmother's house. But as afternoon faded to evening, our temporary reprieve ended. Grandmother picked us up as arranged, and we returned to the Victorian house as darkness fell. The structure seemed to loom larger against the twilight sky, its windows like watchful eyes tracking our approach. I shivered despite the lingering summer heat as we climbed the porch steps. Chilly? Grandmother asked, noticing my reaction. Just tired, I lied. Shopping is exhausting. Inside, the house felt different, expectant, as if holding its breath. I told myself it was my imagination, the power of suggestion working on an already frightened mind. But as I helped Grandmother prepare dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being observed. Several times I caught myself staring at the ceiling, at the spot where the attic trapdoor was located in the hallway. Was it my imagination, or had the ordinary house sounds diminished, creating an unnatural quiet? After dinner, we watched television in the living room. Grandmother dozed in her recliner while Bella and I pretended interest in a reality show neither of us cared about. My attention kept drifting to the darkened hallway beyond the living room archway. Stop looking, Bella whispered, nudging me. You're making it worse. She was right. Fear feeds on attention, grows stronger with acknowledgement. I forced myself to focus on the television, on the mundane problems of the show's contestants, on anything but the growing dread in my chest. When Grandmother woke and announced it was bedtime, panic fluttered in my stomach. Another night in the house, another opportunity for visitation. Actually, Grandma, Bella said suddenly, would it be okay if we slept in the living room tonight? Like a slumber party. Grandmother looked surprised but not displeased. I suppose that would be all right. There are extra blankets in the hall closet. Relief flooded through me. The living room, with its large windows and connections to other parts of the house, felt safer than the enclosed guest room. More escape routes, more light, more openness. We arranged blankets and pillows on the floor, positioning ourselves between the sofa and the television stand. Grandmother wished us good night and retired to her bedroom at the back of the house. Thank you, I whispered to Bella as we settled into our makeshift beds. She squeezed my hand in response. 2 more nights, she said. We can do this. I nodded, grateful for her presence, for the solidarity of shared fear. Whatever haunted this house, we would face it together. The living room clock ticked steadily, marking the passage of time toward midnight. Despite my exhaustion, sleep remained elusive, held at bay by vigilance and apprehension. Beside me, Bella's breathing eventually deepened into sleep. I envied her ability to surrender to unconsciousness while I remained trapped in wakefulness, jumping at every creak and settling sound. As midnight approached, the house grew unnaturally silent. Even the omnipresent hum of the refrigerator seemed muted, distant. The air thickened, becoming difficult to breathe. I sat up, suddenly alert to a change in the atmosphere. Something was different. Something was wrong. The hallway leading to the attic trapdoor was completely dark. Not the ordinary darkness of a nighttime house, but an absolute absence of light that seemed to swallow the weak glow from the digital clock on the cable box. Within that darkness, something moved. I remained perfectly still as the darkness in the hallway shifted and coalesced. It wasn't simply absence of light. It was something tangible, something with mass and intention. Should I wake Bella? Alert grandmother? My throat had closed with fear, making speech impossible. My limbs felt leaden, unresponsive to my brain's frantic commands to move, to run. The darkness advanced to the threshold of the living room, hovering at the boundary as if awaiting invitation. The temperature plummeted, my breath emerging in visible clouds despite the summer heat outside. The humming began, that same discordant melody from the attic and the guest room. It pulsed in time with the expanding and contracting of the darkness, creating a synesthetic experience of sound and movement intertwined. A shape emerged from the amorphous shadow, vaguely humanoid but wrong in proportions, too tall and too thin to be natural. It had no distinguishable features, just a suggestion of form within the greater darkness. "What do you want?" I whispered, the words escaping before I could consider their wisdom. The humming stopped abruptly. The shape tilted what might have been a head, as if considering my question. When it responded, the voice was the same as before, neither male nor female, young nor old. Freedom. The word hung in the air between us, loaded with implication. I thought of the Ouija board in its trunk, of grandmother's warnings, of the witch who had instructed her never to destroy it. "You're trapped," I said, understanding dawning. "Bound to the board." The shape wavered, stretching taller until it nearly touched the ceiling. "Clever child," it said, the words sliding into my mind rather than my ears. "Bound for decades, imprisoned. But you found me. You opened the way." Guilt flooded through me. Our curiosity, our trespassing, had unleashed this entity. "Go back," I said, trying to sound authoritative despite my terror. "Return to the attic. Leave us alone." A sound like cracking ice emanated from the shape. Laughter, I realized with horror. "Too late," it said. "The door is open. Soon I will be free completely." "What does that mean? What do you want from us?" The shape drifted closer, the cold intensifying with its approach. I could see frost forming on the television screen, on the coffee table, on the blanket covering my legs. "A vessel," it said simply. Understanding hit me like physical blow. It needed a body, a human host to fully escape its confinement. My blood ran cold as I realized why it had visited me specifically, why it had targeted me for its midnight communications. It had chosen me as its vessel. "No," I said, stronger now, fear giving way to anger. "You can't have me. You can't have any of us." The shape pulsed, darkness spreading outward like ink in water before contracting again. "Not your choice," it said. "The invitation was given when the seal was broken. The law is clear." "I didn't invite you," I protested. "Intent is irrelevant. Action is binding." The entity advanced another step, now fully in the living room. Frost patterns spread across the floor in its wake. I scrambled backward, pressing against the sofa, desperate to maintain distance. "Bella," I hissed, trying to wake my cousin without drawing the entity's attention. "Bella, wake up." She stirred but didn't wake, her sleep unnaturally deep. The entity had ensured its confrontation with me would be private. My mind raced. What did I know about fighting supernatural entities? Salt, iron, religious symbols, the typical defenses mentioned in folklore and horror films. Would any of them work against something like this? My gaze fell on the crucifix hanging above the television. Grandmother's religious devotion had filled the house with sacred objects. Would they offer protection now? The shape followed my line of sight, then made that terrible ice-cracking laugh again. Symbols have power only through belief, it said. Do you truly believe, child? Or do you merely go through motions to please your family? The question struck at my core. My relationship with religion had always been complicated. Attendance without conviction, participation without passion. Could my wavering faith power a defense against this entity? I had no choice but to try. With a sudden burst of desperate energy, I lunged toward the crucifix, tearing it from the wall and holding it before me like a shield. "In the name of God, I command you to leave this house," I shouted, hoping volume might compensate for my lack of conviction. The entity recoiled slightly, the darkness rippling as if disturbed by a stone thrown into still water. But it didn't retreat fully, maintaining its position at the edge of our makeshift sleeping area. "Stronger than you appear," it conceded, "but not strong enough." It began to expand, the darkness stretching outward to encircle me. The crucifix in my hand grew painfully cold, frost forming on its wooden surface. I could feel the entity's presence pressing against my consciousness, searching for entry points, for weaknesses it could exploit. Bella suddenly gasped awake beside me, jolting upright with disorientation. "What's happening?" she cried, seeing the manifestation before us. "It's from the attic," I managed through chattering teeth. "From the board." Understanding dawned on Bella's face, quickly followed by terror. But something else appeared as well. Determination. She scrambled to her feet, standing beside me in confrontation with the entity. "You're not welcome here," she said firmly. "We made a mistake in disturbing you, but we're correcting it now. Return to where you belong." Our united front seemed to give the entity pause. It contracted slightly, the humming tone lowering in pitch. "Two vessels instead of one," it said, sounding almost pleased. "Brothers and sisters in blood. Even better." "We're cousins," Bella corrected automatically, then looked annoyed at herself for engaging with the thing. A thought struck me suddenly, a memory from one of the countless horror documentaries we had watched. Entities bound to objects couldn't usually stray far from them. The fact that this one could move throughout the house suggested its bonds were weakening, but perhaps it still had limitations. "Bella," I whispered, "it can't leave the house. The board is its anchor." She caught my meaning immediately. "We need to get out of here." Without further discussion, we began edging toward the front door, maintaining our defensive posture with the crucifix held before us. The entity's darkness swirled angrily, expanding to block our path. "You opened the way," it insisted. "The debt must be paid." "We owe you nothing," I countered, though uncertainty plagued me. Had we inadvertently entered into some supernatural contract by opening the trunk? Were there metaphysical laws at work beyond our understanding? We reached the entryway, the front door just steps away. The entity's darkness lashed out like tentacles, wrapping around furniture, climbing walls, attempting to surround us completely. "Grandma!" Bella shouted, abandoning stealth for direct assistance. "Grandma! Help us!" The entity's reaction was immediate and violent. A shockwave of cold energy burst outward, knocking us both to the floor. The crucifix flew from my hand, skittering across the hardwood into a corner. "Silence!" the entity commanded, its voice reverberating painfully in my skull. "She cannot help you. No one can." As if to punctuate its threat, every light bulb in the entryway and living room shattered simultaneously, plunging us into deeper darkness broken only by moonlight filtering through the windows. Desperation fueled my next move. I grabbed Bella's hand and made a final dash for the door, no longer caring about confrontation, only escape. My fingers closed around the doorknob, twisting frantically. It wouldn't turn. The door had been locked, or worse, sealed by supernatural means. "The back door," Bella suggested, tugging me toward the kitchen. We had taken only a few steps when Grandmother's voice called from the hallway. "Girls, what's all this noise about?" Horror froze me in place. Grandmother was walking directly into the confrontation, unaware of the danger. The entity's darkness parted momentarily, creating a path from the hallway to where we stood. Grandmother appeared, dressed in a nightgown, her gray hair loose around her shoulders. She looked annoyed rather than frightened, squinting into the darkness of the entryway. "What in heaven's name is going on? Did the power go out?" Before we could warn her, the entity reformed between us, its darkness more substantial than ever. Grandmother stopped abruptly, her expression shifting from irritation to recognition. "Oh," she said softly. "You've returned." I never expected my summer at Grandmother's house to change my life so fundamentally. When I first learned she knew exactly what the dark entity was, my world tilted on its axis. "I know exactly what it is," she said with a hardened expression I'd never seen before. "And I know it should be confined to the attic." Her confrontation with the swirling darkness revealed a family secret I'd never imagined, one that had been sealed away in that forbidden attic trunk. The guilt consumed me as I realized our innocent curiosity had unleashed something dangerous. We'd ignored Grandmother's warnings about the attic storage, and now this entity, this physical darkness that moved with disturbing intelligence, threatened us all. Grandmother's calm efficiency as she retrieved the ritual materials terrified me more than the entity itself. The small wooden box with its silver bell, vial, dried herbs, and leather-bound book represented a side of my grandmother I never knew existed. When she explained how my aunt had nearly been possessed years ago, I finally understood the stakes. Our Catholic upbringing hadn't prepared me for this reality where ancient bindings and salt barriers stood between our world and something malevolent. Standing in that kitchen, watching Grandmother position us for the ritual, I felt a strange transition happening within me. Fear remained, certainly, but determination began to override it, especially when I volunteered to return to the attic alone. Every step toward that trunk felt like moving through molasses, the entity's whispers attempting to undermine my resolve. "They sacrifice you willingly," it hissed, but I pushed forward. When I finally slammed the trunk shut and turned the key in the lock, the entity's howl of rage confirmed what Grandmother had taught us. We held power in this realm if we chose to claim it. Returning to the kitchen to complete the ritual marked my crossing into a different understanding of both my grandmother and myself. As the silver bell gave its final ring and the oppressive atmosphere lifted, I realized we had succeeded. The entity was contained once more, but the experience had irrevocably changed us. Grandmother's revelation that she would teach us to maintain the binding, that this responsibility would someday be ours, transformed what had been a terrifying encounter into something more meaningful. "Someday this house will be yours," she said. And with it, this responsibility. I lay awake that night contemplating our unexpected inheritance. The house I'd always known as simply Grandmother's place was now revealed as something far more significant. A prison for an entity beyond ordinary understanding. A repository of knowledge most people would never encounter. The fear hadn't disappeared, but alongside it grew something I hadn't anticipated. Purpose. We had confronted true darkness and emerged changed, but unbroken. As the house settled around us with its familiar creaks, I realized our true inheritance wasn't just property, but protection. Not just knowledge of darkness, but the power to contain it. And in that understanding, I finally found peace enough to sleep. October 31st, 1978. The date remains etched in my memory like initials carved into ancient wood. I was 14 then, a freshman at Westfield High in northern New Jersey, still clinging to the precipice between childhood and whatever comes after. Halloween had always been my favorite holiday, but that year, that night, would forever change what fear meant to me. The afternoon sky had turned the color of bruised fruit by the time Coach Harmon finally blew his whistle, ending our football practice. Most guys rushed to the showers, eager to start their Halloween festivities, but Ben, Theo, and I lingered on the field, stretching our sore muscles and planning our night. "Are we still hitting Oak Ridge Avenue?" Theo asked, adjusting his shoulder pads. "My cousin says they give out full-sized candy bars at the Blue Victorian." Ben scoffed, flicking his long hair from his eyes. "Aren't we getting too old for that shit?" That was Ben. Always trying to seem above everything, too cool to care. With his leather jacket and perpetual cigarette, he'd mastered the art of teenage rebellion in ways Theo and I could only imitate. While we lived in matching split levels with curfews and dinner tables, Ben's home life operated without visible boundaries. His mother worked nights, his father was long gone, and supervision was a foreign concept. "Free candy is free candy," I said, pulling grass from my cleats. "Besides, we've got built-in costumes." I gestured to our jerseys. "Football players. Scary enough." The truth was we existed in that awkward teenage space. Too old for trick-or-treating, too young to abandon it completely. We were fumbling toward adulthood with uncertain hands, desperate to seem grown while clinging to childhood comforts. After showering, we dumped our gear in our lockers and headed out into the autumn air. Fallen leaves crunched beneath our feet as we walked through our neighborhood, watching younger kids in store-bought costumes dart excitedly between houses. The sun had fully surrendered by then, leaving us to navigate by porch lights and jack-o'-lantern grins. "We should hit the cemetery later," Ben suggested, lighting a cigarette despite my mother's rule about smoking around me. She'd smell it on my clothes later, but I wouldn't tell her where it came from. "I've got something that'll freak you guys out." Theo and I exchanged glances. Ben's something usually meant trouble, but we were 14 and fearless. Or so we thought. "What kind of something?" Theo asked. Ben reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crude metal object. It took me a moment to recognize it as a cross, crudely soldered in shop class, its edges rough and uneven. "Made it last week," he said, flipping it upside down. "Call me Johnny Blade." I rolled my eyes. Ben had been obsessed with heavy metal lately. Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, Dio. He'd play their albums at deafening volumes in his basement, analyzing lyrics for hidden meanings and spinning records backward to find messages. The upside-down cross was just his latest attempt at rebellion. "Your mom know you're going full satanic?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Ben shrugged. "She doesn't notice shit. Besides, it's Halloween. Perfect night to summon something, don't you think?" His words sent an unexpected shiver through me. The night suddenly felt colder, the darkness deeper, but I laughed it off, punching his arm as we approached our first house. "Just don't get us arrested, okay? My dad will kill me if I get another call from Officer Jennings." We hit about 20 houses, our pillowcases gradually filling with candy despite awkward looks from adults who clearly thought we were too old for this. Around 9, with our hall secured, Theo suggested we head to his place. His parents were at a neighborhood party until midnight. "We can raid their liquor cabinet," he offered. "Just a little from each bottle so they won't notice." It seemed like the perfect end to our night. We had no idea it was only the beginning. Theo's house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, a modest split level with aluminum siding and perfectly trimmed hedges. Normally, we'd head straight to the basement with its wood-paneled walls and worn pool table, but tonight Theo led us to the first floor and into his parents' bedroom. "Why are we in here?" I asked, suddenly uncomfortable. There was something invasive about being in Mr. and Mrs. Bradshaw's private space. Their matching nightstands, the floral bedspread, framed wedding photos. Dad keeps the good stuff in here, Theo explained, heading for the closet. Besides, all the Halloween candy is upstairs. We dumped our bags onto the bed, sorting through our haul while Theo searched the closet. Ben sprawled across the mattress, examining a small bottle of bourbon he'd smuggled from home. Found it! Theo emerged triumphantly with a bottle of brandy. We'll just take a little. They never drink this stuff except at Christmas. That's when it happened. The clock radio on the nightstand clicked on by itself, sudden and loud. Static filled the room before settling on a late-night talk show. The three of us froze. Very funny, I said, assuming one of them had hit a button. Turn it off. Ben raised his hands. Wasn't me. Theo approached the radio cautiously. It's got a timer. Dad probably set it. He switched it off, but the skin at the nape of my neck tightened. Something felt wrong. We continued sorting candy, trading pieces, and arguing over which were worth keeping, when the overhead light flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. We paused again, exchanged glances. Old wiring, Theo said with forced casualness. Ben sat up, a strange expression crossing his face. Or maybe it's a sign. He pulled out the crude metal cross, flipping it upside down. It is Halloween, after all. Don't, I said, the word escaping before I could stop it. But Ben was already standing, moving toward the radio with exaggerated ceremony. Oh, mighty dark lord, he intoned, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. We summon thee on this hallowed night. Stop being a dick, Theo said, but his voice wavered. The light flickered again, more violently this time. The radio switched back on, cycling rapidly through stations, snippets of music, voices, static. Ben, seriously, I said, cut it out. But his eyes had taken on a glazed quality. He moved to the lamp, holding the cross over it. By the power of darkness, I command thee to appear. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. I felt goosebumps rising on my arms, a heaviness settling in my chest. Ben's performance had crossed some invisible line from stupid to unsettling. That's when he noticed the wooden crucifix hanging above the bedroom door. A simple blessing Mr. Bradshaw's Catholic mother had insisted upon. Ben approached it slowly, raising his metal cross toward it. In the name of... What happened next defies logical explanation. One moment Ben was standing by the door, the next he was airborne, his body lifting 3 feet off the ground before being hurled across the room. He landed on the bed between Theo and me with such force that the frame creaked in protest. I scrambled backward, falling off the bed and onto the floor. The lights were pulsing now, the radio cycling through stations at impossible speed, the volume rising and falling in waves. What the fuck? Theo shouted, but his voice seemed distant through the noise. Ben's body convulsed on the bed, his back arching at an unnatural angle. His eyes rolled back, showing only whites, and his mouth opened in a silent scream. Then his tongue began to curl backward, as if he were trying to swallow it. Help him! I screamed, frozen in place. Theo lunged forward, forcing his fingers into Ben's mouth, trying to keep his airway clear. Ben! Ben! I couldn't move. Terror had cemented my limbs, turned my blood to ice. All I could do was watch as my friend's body betrayed him, as something unseen worked its will upon him. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The lights steadied, the radio fell silent. Ben's body went limp, his breathing ragged but present. What? He gasped, his voice raw. What happened? Theo and I exchanged horrified glances. You don't remember? I asked. Ben sat up slowly, touching his throat. I was by the door and then... nothing. We tried explaining what we'd seen, but the words felt inadequate, failing to capture the wrongness of it all. Ben listened in silence, his face growing paler with each word. We need to get out of here, Theo finally said, glancing nervously at the bedroom door. None of us argued. We spilled onto Theo's front lawn like survivors from a shipwreck, gulping fresh air and putting distance between ourselves and the house. The neighborhood seemed unnervingly normal. Porch lights glowing, distant laughter of trick-or-treaters, a dog barking somewhere down the street. How could everything look so ordinary when the world had just tilted on its axis? It was a joke, Ben said suddenly, hugging himself against the autumn chill. I was just messing with you guys. Theo shook his head. No way, you were off the ground, Ben. I saw it. People don't float, Ben insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. And they don't get thrown across rooms by invisible forces. I stared back at Theo's house. From outside, we could see the bedroom window where the lights were still flickering erratically. The sight sent fresh terror coursing through me. Your parents' room, I whispered to Theo. What are you going to tell them? The color drained from his face. Oh shit. They'll kill me if they think we were in there. We stood in uncertain silence, the gravity of our situation sinking in. Something impossible had happened, something none of us understood. And Ben, tough, rebellious Ben, looked broken. His hands trembled as he tried and failed to light a cigarette. I should go home, he said finally, his voice small. Can you even walk? Theo asked. Ben had been nearly catatonic after the incident, barely able to navigate the hallway to the front door. I'll call my mom, he said, avoiding our eyes. Theo went back inside, using the phone in the kitchen while keeping a wary distance from the bedroom door. Ben and I waited on the lawn, not speaking. What was there to say? I watched him, searching for signs of... what? Possession? Mental breakdown? He just looked like Ben. Pale, shaken, but still my friend. You don't remember anything? I finally asked. He shook his head. Just... cold. It felt really cold, and then nothing. He hesitated. Did I say anything when it was happening? No, I assured him. You couldn't speak. Relief flooded his features, making me wonder what he feared he might have said. Before I could ask, Theo returned. Your mom's coming, he told Ben. Said she'd be here in 10 minutes. We waited in uncomfortable silence, occasionally glancing at the bedroom window where the lights continued their eerie dance. None of us suggested going back inside. When Ben's mother's station wagon finally pulled up, he moved toward it like a sleepwalker. At the last moment he turned back to us, his expression haunted. Don't tell anyone, he pleaded. Please. We nodded, watching as he climbed into the passenger seat. His mother waved cheerfully, oblivious to the night's events. As they drove away, I wondered if Ben would ever be the same. What now? Theo asked, once they disappeared around the corner. I looked back at his house. I should go home too. My parents... Don't leave me here alone, he interrupted, panic edging his voice. Not with... that. I couldn't blame him. The thought of going back inside made my stomach turn. We could wait in the garage until your parents get home? He nodded gratefully. Yeah, that works. We retreated to his father's workshop, sitting on metal stools amid the organized tools and half-finished projects. Neither of us mentioned what we'd witnessed. It seemed safer somehow to let it sit untouched between us, like a bomb we feared might detonate if examined too closely. When headlights finally swept across the garage door shortly after midnight, we both sagged with relief. Theo's parents were home. We wouldn't have to face the darkness alone. Remember, Theo whispered as we went to greet them. Not a word about the bedroom. I nodded, forcing a casual smile as Mr. and Mrs. Bradshaw approached. They were slightly tipsy from the party, asking about our Halloween night with genuine interest. We gave them the sanitized version, trick-or-treating, watching horror movies, normal teenage stuff. When I finally walked home 20 minutes later, every shadow seemed alive with malevolent potential. I ran the last block to my house, not stopping until I was safely inside with the door locked behind me. That night, I lay in bed with every light in my room blazing. Sleep was impossible. Each creak of the house, each whisper of wind against the windows sent fresh terror through me. I kept seeing Ben's body arching unnaturally, his eyes rolling back. What had happened to him? What had we done? I cried that night, quiet, desperate tears into my pillow, not just from fear, but from the certainty that something had fundamentally changed. The world I'd known that morning no longer existed. School the next day felt surreal. I walked the familiar hallways in a fog, jumping at slammed lockers and flinching when someone touched my shoulder. I hadn't slept, and reality had a fuzzy, dreamlike quality that made everything seem slightly off-center. I waited for Ben outside his homeroom, uncertain what I'd say, but needing to see him. When he finally appeared, our eyes met with the loaded understanding of shared trauma. He looked terrible, pale, with dark circles under his eyes. The confident swagger that usually defined his movements was gone. "Hey," I managed, my voice barely audible over the hallway chaos. He nodded slightly. "Hey." We stood in awkward silence until the warning bell rang. Ben shifted uncomfortably. "Look, about last night." "It's okay," I interrupted, desperate to restore normalcy. "We don't have to talk about it." Then, forcing a smile, I added, "Unless you can use your new powers to torch Coach Harmon's car. Practice was brutal yesterday." The joke landed better than I'd hoped. Ben's lips twitched upward and some of the tension left his shoulders. "I'll see what I can do," he said, almost managing his old sarcasm. We parted ways, promising to meet at lunch. That brief exchange sustained me through morning classes where I struggled to focus on algebraic equations and historical dates. How could any of it matter after what we'd witnessed? Theo found me between classes, pulling me into an empty stairwell. "My parents' room is normal," he whispered, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. "The radio, the lights, everything's working fine." I wasn't sure if this was reassuring or more terrifying. If the physical evidence had vanished, did that make our experience less real? Or worse, did it mean whatever had happened was specifically targeted at us, at Ben? "Have you seen him?" Theo asked. I nodded. Briefly, he seems okay, I guess. Shaken up. "Should we talk to someone? A priest, maybe?" The suggestion sent ice through my veins. "And say what? That our friend floated in the air while playing with an upside-down cross?" "When you put it like that." Theo sighed. "I didn't sleep at all last night." "Me neither." The second bell rang, forcing us back to class, back to pretending everything was normal when nothing would ever be normal again. At lunch, Ben joined us at our usual table, but the easy camaraderie that had defined our friendship was fractured. We spoke about meaningless things: homework, the upcoming game, Jessica Winter's Halloween party that none of us had been invited to. The elephant in the room remained unaddressed. Days passed this way, surface-level conversations masking the seismic shift beneath. Ben stopped wearing his leather jacket, stopped playing metal music when we came over. The Johnny Blade persona vanished, replaced by a quieter, more cautious version of our friend. 2 weeks after Halloween, he was kicked off the football team for smoking behind the bleachers. Coach caught him red-handed, but I think Ben wanted to be caught. It gave him an excuse to distance himself further. Without football tying us together, our friendship began to fray. Ben started hanging out with a different crowd, the burnouts who skipped class to get high in the parking lot. Theo and I still sat together at lunch, but our conversations grew increasingly strained, haunted by the thing we refused to discuss. By Christmas break, we were little more than acquaintances who nodded in the hallway. The incident had wedged itself between us like an invisible barrier, impossible to scale. I tried telling the story once at a sleepover in February. 5 of us packed into Scott Bryant's basement, swapping ghost stories over stolen beer. When my turn came, I started hesitantly, leaving out names and specific details. And then he just lifted off the ground, like something picked him up and threw him. Their faces told me everything. The uncomfortable shifting, the half smiles. They thought I was making it up, embellishing for effect. Right, Scott said when I finished. And I'm sure he was speaking in tongues too, huh? I laughed it off, pretending it was just a story, but the experience stayed dormant inside me like a hibernating creature, waiting. Junior year marked the complete dissolution of what remained of our friendship. Ben had transformed entirely. His long hair now dyed black, his existence at school a peripheral one. He collected detentions like trophies and spoke to no one about the night that had changed everything. Theo and I maintained a casual friendship, but the easy companionship of our freshman year was long gone. We'd both found new social circles, different interests. When we did speak, we carefully avoided any reference to Halloween 1978. I dated, joined the yearbook committee, applied to colleges. Life continued in its predictable progression, but beneath the surface I remained altered. I avoided anything with even a hint of the occult, certain music, horror movies, Ouija boards at parties. Friends teased me for being superstitious. If only they knew. In April of that year, I ran into Ben at the record store downtown. He was flipping through albums, and for a moment, I almost didn't recognize him. He'd lost weight, and a new hardness had settled into his features. "Hey," I said, the greeting awkward on my tongue. He looked up, surprised. "Hey, yourself." We made painful small talk. Classes, graduation plans, mutual acquaintances. Then, as I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked, his voice low. I didn't need to ask what it was. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Do you?" His eyes darkened. "Every day." The raw honesty in his voice cracked something open in me. Has anything else happened?" Ben glanced around the store, then pulled me toward the exit. Outside, he lit a cigarette with trembling hands. "I hear things sometimes," he said, exhaling smoke. "Voices, when I'm alone." He laughed hollowly. "My mom thinks I'm on drugs. Maybe I am. Maybe that's all it is." "Ben, I need to know what happened," he interrupted. "What really happened that night?" I shifted uncomfortably. "How? It's not like there's a guidebook for this sort of thing." "There's someone who might help, a woman in Milford. She's supposed to be sensitive to these things." My stomach dropped. "Like a psychic?" "Like someone who might have answers," he corrected. "I'm going to see her tomorrow. You could come." The invitation hung between us, charged with all our unspoken history. Part of me wanted to refuse, to continue the careful avoidance that had become my coping mechanism. But a deeper part, the part still trapped in that bedroom on Halloween night, needed closure. "Okay," I heard myself say. "What time?" Relief flooded his features. 4, after school. I'll pick you up." As I watched him walk away, I wondered what I'd just committed to. The thought of deliberately confronting what happened filled me with dread. But the alternative, continuing to live with the unnamed fear, seemed worse. The next day, Ben was waiting in his battered Chevy when final bell rang. I climbed in, noting the lingering smell of cigarettes and the pentagram dangling from his rearview mirror. "Thought you gave all that up," I said, nodding toward the symbol. He shrugged. "Protection, not worship. There's a difference." We drove in silence for 20 minutes, leaving the familiar confines of our suburb for the more rural outskirts of Milford. Finally, Ben turned onto a gravel driveway leading to a small, well-kept cottage. "This is it," he said, killing the engine. "Her name's Mrs. Donovan. I called her yesterday. She's expecting us." I followed him up the garden path, anxiety building with each step. The woman who answered the door wasn't what I expected. No flowing robes or dramatic makeup, just a petite, gray-haired woman in a cardigan and slacks. "Benjamin," she greeted him warmly, "and you must be his friend. Come in, boys." The interior of the cottage was equally mundane. Floral furniture, family photos, a television in the corner. No crystal balls or tarot cards in sight. Mrs. Donovan led us to a small kitchen table where tea was already steeping in a chipped ceramic pot. "Now," she said after pouring us each a cup, "tell me why you're here." Ben looked at me, then back at her. "Something happened to us, to me, last Halloween." As he recounted the story, I watched Mrs. Donovan's face. She showed no surprise, no disbelief, just calm attention, nodding occasionally. When Ben described being thrown across the room, she leaned forward slightly. "And you've been experiencing disturbances since?" she asked when he finished. Ben hesitated. "Voices. Dreams. Sometimes I wake up with bruises I can't explain." This was news to me. I looked at him sharply, but he avoided my gaze. Mrs. Donovan sat back, considering. "May I?" she asked, extending her hands across the table. Ben placed his palms in hers without hesitation. I watched, skeptical, yet terrified of what she might discover. Her eyes closed. Her breathing slowed. For several minutes, the only sound was the ticking of a wall clock and distant bird calls from outside. When she finally opened her eyes, her expression was grave. "You opened a door that night," she said softly. "With your actions, your words. Something noticed." "What kind of something?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She shook her head. "Names have power. It's enough to know it doesn't belong here, in our world." She squeezed Ben's hands. "It's attached itself to you. Not possession. Not yet. But attachment." Ben's face drained of color. "How do I get rid of it?" "You need to close the door you opened," she replied. "Renounce what you invited in." "How?" "Return to where it happened. Bring a blessed object. Not the mockery you created, but something genuine. Declare your rejection of what entered. Mean it with every fiber of your being." I felt sick. "You want us to go back to Theo's parents' bedroom?" "The location matters," she confirmed. "Energy concentrates in places where boundaries have been crossed." Ben withdrew his hands, rubbing them as if they'd gone numb. "And if I don't?" Mrs. Donovan's eyes softened with pity. "It will get stronger. The voices will become clearer. The boundary between you and it will thin until—" She didn't need to finish. We understood. Convincing Theo was harder than I'd anticipated. After 2 years of careful avoidance, suddenly suggesting we revisit the site of our collective trauma seemed insane. "Absolutely not," he said when I approached him after chemistry lab. "No way, no fucking way." "Ben needs our help," I argued, keeping my voice low as students streamed past us in the hallway. "Ben hasn't spoken to me in over a year," Theo countered. "And now he wants to perform some exorcism in my parents' bedroom? Are you hearing yourself?" I couldn't blame him. From the outside, it did sound crazy. But I'd seen Ben's face when Mrs. Donovan described what was happening to him. I'd recognized the desperation, the fear. Something is wrong with him, Theo. Really wrong. And it started that night with us. Theo leaned against the lockers, conflict evident on his face. "My parents are going to Hartford this weekend," he said finally. "Visiting my aunt. We'd have the house to ourselves." Relief flooded through me. "So you'll do it?" I didn't say that. He pushed off from the lockers. "Let me think about it." It took 2 more days of persuasion, but Theo eventually agreed. Whether from lingering guilt or morbid curiosity, he set the time. Saturday at midnight, the witching hour. A final theatrical touch to our supernatural drama. When the night arrived, I found myself sitting in Ben's car outside Theo's house, my heart hammering against my ribs. Ben had been mostly silent during the drive, his face a mask of determination. Between us on the seat lay a silver crucifix, blessed by the priest at St. Mary's, Ben had assured me. "Are you sure about this?" I asked as we approached the front door. Ben's jaw tightened. "I don't have a choice." Theo answered on the first knock, ushering us inside with nervous energy. The house looked exactly as I remembered it. The same family photos lining the hallway, the same worn carpet runner. Only we had changed. "I've got beer," Theo offered, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Figured we might need it." Ben shook his head. "I need to be clear-headed for this." We gathered in the living room, the 3 of us forming a triangle of shared history and unspoken fears. Theo glanced toward the hallway leading to his parents' room. "So, what exactly is the plan here?" he asked. "We just go in and..." "What? Ben says some magic words and everything's fixed?" "It's not magic," Ben said tersely. "It's more like undoing something, closing what we opened." Theo snorted. "Right, because that makes total sense." "You weren't there," I interjected. "With Mrs. Donovan. You didn't hear what she said about..." "Some crazy woman telling ghost stories doesn't make this real," Theo interrupted. "Maybe Ben just had a seizure that night. Maybe the power surge fucked with the lights and radio. There are explanations that don't involve the supernatural." "Then why did you agree to this?" Ben asked quietly. Theo fell silent, unable or unwilling to articulate his own complicated motivations. Finally, he sighed. "Let's just get it over with." The walk down the hallway felt like miles. Each step brought back flashes of that night, Ben's body arching unnaturally, the lights pulsing, the radio cycling through stations. By the time we reached the bedroom door, my palms were slick with sweat. Theo pushed it open, revealing a room that had hardly changed in 2 years. The same floral bedspread, the same matching nightstands. The crucifix still hung above the door. "Does anyone else feel cold?" I asked as we stepped inside. Ben nodded slightly, his eyes fixed on the spot where he'd stood that Halloween night. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing the silver crucifix and holding it tightly. "What do we do now?" Theo whispered. "I need to stand where it happened," Ben said, moving toward the door. "And you 2 need to be where you were, on the bed." Theo and I exchanged uneasy glances, but complied, sitting stiffly on the edge of the mattress. Ben positioned himself directly beneath the wooden crucifix, the silver one clutched in his right hand. "I renounce what I invited," he began, his voice steadier than I'd expected. "I reject the darkness I welcomed. I close the door I opened." Nothing happened. No flickering lights, no radio turning on. Just 3 teenagers in a bedroom feeling increasingly foolish. "Maybe try something else?" I suggested after a minute of silence. Ben's face hardened with determination. He raised the silver crucifix higher. "By the power of light, I command whatever entered here to leave. Return to where you came from and release your hold on me." The temperature seemed to drop further. I shivered, hugging myself against the sudden chill. Theo shifted uncomfortably beside me. "Ben," he started, "maybe we should..." The bedroom door slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. The overhead light began to flicker, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency. On the nightstand, the clock radio clicked on, cycling through stations at an impossible speed. "Holy shit," Theo breathed, scrambling backward on the bed. Holy shit, holy shit. Ben stood frozen in place, the crucifix extended before him like a shield. I reject you, he repeated, his voice rising over the radio static. I close this door. I command you to leave. The air around him seemed to ripple, like heat rising from pavement. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something else occupying the same space as Ben. A darker silhouette superimposed over his body, taller and somehow wrong in its proportions. Get out! Ben screamed, his voice cracking. Leave me alone! What happened next defied physical laws and rational explanation. Ben's body lifted from the floor, not dramatically as before, but a subtle rise of several inches. His back arched, his head tilting backward at an impossible angle. From his mouth came a sound I'd never heard before and hoped never to hear again. A layered noise that seemed to contain multiple voices, none of them Ben's. Theo was on his feet, panicked. What do we do? What the fuck do we do? I was paralyzed, watching as my friend's body became a battleground for forces I couldn't comprehend. The crucifix in Ben's hand began to smoke, the silver appearing to melt between his fingers. He showed no reaction to what must have been excruciating pain. Help him, I managed, forcing myself off the bed. We have to help him. I grabbed Ben's shoulders, shocked by how cold his skin felt through his shirt. Theo hesitated, then joined me, taking Ben's other side. Together we tried to ground him, to pull him back to earth literally and figuratively. Ben! I shouted over the radio's chaos. Ben, fight it. We're here. We're with you. His eyes rolled forward, finding mine. For a second, I saw recognition there, then terror, then determination. Together, he gasped, the word barely audible. Say it with me. Understanding flooded through me. I reject the darkness, I began. I reject the darkness, Theo echoed, his voice shaking. Ben's lips moved in sync with ours, forming the words we hadn't known we needed to say. I close this door. I return what doesn't belong. I reclaim this space, this body, this life. With each word, the pressure in the room seemed to ease. The light steadied, the radio quieted. Ben's feet touched the floor again, his body relaxing as if a massive weight had been lifted. Is it... Theo couldn't finish the question. Ben looked at his blistered palm where the crucifix had burned him. I think so, he whispered. I think it's gone. We stood in stunned silence, the three of us connected by touch and shared trauma and something deeper that had no name. The bedroom felt ordinary again, just furniture and wallpaper and the distant sound of a neighbor's dog barking. We should get that burn looked at, I finally said, gesturing to Ben's hand. He shook his head. It's okay. It's worth it. We left the bedroom together, closing the door firmly behind us. None of us suggested staying in the house any longer than necessary. By unspoken agreement, we moved to the front porch, gulping the cool night air like men rescued from drowning. What just happened in there? Theo asked after several minutes of silence. Ben looked at his injured hand, then at us. We fixed something that was broken. We closed a door. It wasn't a complete answer, but it was enough. Some experiences defy language, existing in spaces between what we know and what we fear. What happened that night, both nights, would always live in that liminal space for me. In movies, shared trauma bonds people together permanently. In reality, it often pushes them apart. Despite what we'd experienced, what we'd overcome together, the three of us continued our separate trajectories through high school and beyond. Ben transferred to a different school for senior year. His mother remarried, relocating them to Pennsylvania. Before he left, he stopped by my house unexpectedly, appearing on my doorstep one July afternoon. I wanted to say goodbye, he said, standing awkwardly in our foyer. And thank you. I invited him in, surprised by how normal he looked. The hardness that had settled into his features had softened. the haunted look in his eyes gone. He'd cut his hair short, abandoned the all-black wardrobe for jeans and a plain t-shirt. "You seem better," I observed as we sat at my kitchen table. He nodded. "I am. No more voices, no more feelings. Whatever it was, it's gone." Years passed, decades really. I graduated, went to college, built a career in marketing, married, had children of my own. The events of those Halloween nights receded into memory, vivid but distant, like a movie watched in childhood. I rarely thought about Ben or Theo until my 25th high school reunion in 2003. I almost didn't attend, but my wife encouraged me, curious about the people who'd shaped my adolescence. The hotel ballroom was filled with familiar yet changed faces, everyone a little heavier, a little grayer, wearing name tags that seemed unnecessary for some and essential for others. I was studying the appetizer table when I heard a voice behind me. "Still afraid of the dark?" I turned to find Theo smiling at me. His hairline receded, but his eyes the same. We embraced awkwardly, exchanging the usual updates. He was an architect now, married with twin daughters. "Have you seen him?" Theo asked after we'd exhausted the small talk. I didn't need to ask who. "No, not since senior year." "He's here," Theo said, nodding toward the bar. "Showed up about an hour ago." Ben stood alone, nursing a drink, looking surprisingly unchanged. He'd kept himself fit, his posture straight, only a few threads of silver at his temples betraying the passage of time. We approached him together, united again by the invisible thread of shared history. His face broke into a genuine smile when he saw us. "My God," he said, setting down his glass. "The three musketeers together again." We found a quiet corner away from the reunion's noise, catching up on 25 years of life. Ben had become a psychologist, specializing in trauma recovery. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. "Do you ever think about it?" I finally asked, the question that had lingered for decades. Ben's expression grew serious. "Every day, not with fear anymore, but awareness. Whatever happened changed me. Maybe for the better." "Do you believe it was real?" Theo asked. "I've spent years trying to explain it away." "Does it matter?" Ben replied. "Real or not, it happened to us. It shaped us." We fell silent, each lost in our own memories of that night. Then Ben raised his glass. "To close doors," he said quietly. Theo and I raised our glasses in response. To close doors. Some experiences can't be fully explained or understood, only carried. That night in 1978 lives within the three of us, a shared burden, a strange gift. I've never encountered anything supernatural since, but I no longer doubt the possibility. The world is wider and stranger than we know, with doors we never meant to open and forces we never meant to invite. But some doors, once closed properly, stay closed. And for that, I remain grateful. The story I'm about to tell you happened to me, though I've spent years trying to convince myself otherwise. It occurred in a small coastal town in northern Greece, a place both beautiful and haunted by its history. I won't name it specifically, as some wounds never fully heal, and this particular town carries many. The events took place in the summer of 2014 when I was 22. I had recently graduated from university and decided to spend a month in my grandmother's hometown before starting my career. My grandmother, Eleni, had moved to America decades earlier, but she spoke of her homeland with such vivid detail that I felt I knew every stone and street corner before I ever set foot there. I arrived in early June, renting a modest apartment in the town center. My goal was simple: connect with my roots, improve my Greek, and perhaps uncover some family history. The locals welcomed me warmly when they learned I was Eleni's grandson. They called me by my name, Thomas. but pronounced it with a Greek inflection that made it sound both foreign and familiar. The town itself was a picture of Mediterranean beauty. Whitewashed buildings with blue trim, narrow cobblestone streets winding upward from the harbor, and the constant accompaniment of cicadas singing in the olive trees. But beneath this postcard, perfection, lay an unspoken darkness. As a child, I'd overheard fragments of stories about what had happened there during the war. Now I was old enough to learn the truth. My grandmother had shared bits and pieces over the years, though never the complete story. I knew that in December 1941, shortly after Greece was pulled into World War II, the German army had swept through the region. Beyond that, details were sparse, as if speaking them aloud might resurrect old horrors. On my third day in town, I met Nicholas at a local cafe. He was in his 30s, an English teacher at the local school who was eager to practice his already near-perfect English. We connected instantly, sharing stories over strong Greek coffee and plates of baklava. "So, Thomas, what brings you to our little corner of nowhere?" he asked with a smile. I explained about my grandmother and my desire to understand my heritage better. "Ah, Eleni's grandson. I should have known from your eyes. They're just like hers. She was a child during the occupation." "Yes?" I nodded. "She left after the war, never came back, though she talks about this place all the time." Nicholas's expression darkened. Many never returned. Some couldn't bear to see what remained. That evening, as we walked along the harbor, Nicholas told me about Ypsilanti Hill, which rose at the edge of town. At its summit stood a simple stone monument known locally as the Cross. "It's our town's memorial," he explained. "During the occupation, the Germans gathered every male over 12 years old, brothers, fathers, sons, and took them to that hill. They murdered 500 of them in a single afternoon using machine guns. After, they burned the town. The few who survived did so by playing dead among the bodies of their neighbors and relatives." The casual way he delivered this horror struck me deeply. This wasn't ancient history. This was my grandmother's generation. These were her neighbors, perhaps even relatives. "Is that why she left?" I asked quietly. "Many did. The memories." Nicholas trailed off, looking toward the hill where it loomed against the darkening sky. "Some say the memories linger there still." I couldn't stop thinking about the hill. For days afterward, I found my gaze drawn to it, its gentle slopes and the stark white cross visible from almost anywhere in town. Something about it called to me. Perhaps it was the connection to my family's past, or simply morbid curiosity. A week into my stay, I decided to visit. The morning was bright and clear as I began my hike up the winding path. Olive trees dotted the lower slopes, giving way to scrubby pines higher up. Birds called from the branches, and the scent of wild thyme filled the air. It felt peaceful, almost inappropriately so, given what had happened there. The monument itself was simple, a large stone cross with a bronze plaque listing names, hundreds of them arranged by family. I scanned them, wondering if any shared my grandmother's maiden name. Finding none, I felt relieved, then immediately guilty for feeling so. An elderly man was tending to some flowers at the base of the monument. He nodded to me but didn't speak. I watched as he methodically watered each plant, then lit a small candle before crossing himself and departing down the path I'd come up. I spent nearly an hour at the monument, reading every name, trying to imagine the lives they'd lived and the futures they'd lost. As I turned to leave, I noticed something glinting in the grass near the edge of the clearing. Bending down, I found a tarnished military button. The design was unmistakably German, an eagle clutching a swastika. My stomach lurched. I nearly threw it down the hillside, but instead pocketed it, feeling I should show it to someone who might know what to do with such a relic. That evening, I showed the button to Nicholas at dinner. "You found this at the cross?" he asked, turning it over in his fingers. "Yes. Should I turn it into a museum or something?" He handed it back. "Perhaps." though most locals would tell you to bury it or throw it into the sea. Some things are better not kept. Have you been up there at night? I asked, surprising myself with the question. Nicholas looked up sharply. No one goes there at night. Is it forbidden? Not officially, no. But... He hesitated. Thomas, this is a small town with deep beliefs, the older generation especially. They believe some places retain echoes of what happened there. You mean they think it's haunted? He smiled thinly. I'm a modern man. I teach science to children. But even I wouldn't spend a night on that hill. He leaned closer. Listen to me. The people who died there, they weren't just killed. They were torn from everything they loved. Their wives, their children, their homes. All in an instant with no goodbye. That kind of sudden severing, it leaves a mark. I should have heeded his warning. Instead, it only deepened my fascination. 3 nights later, I found myself climbing Ypsilanti Hill under a 3/4 moon. I told myself I was just going for the view. The town lights reflecting off the bay would be beautiful. But deep down, I knew I was chasing something else. Some connection. Some understanding I couldn't find in daylight hours. The hill was different at night. The friendly olive trees became twisted silhouettes. The chirping birds were replaced by unseen creatures rustling in the underbrush. Even the air felt heavier, carrying the briny scent of the sea mixed with something earthy and ancient. I reached the monument just after midnight. The cross stood pale against the dark sky, casting a long shadow across the clearing. I sat on a stone bench facing the town and opened the thermos of coffee I'd brought. Below me, the town slept, a cluster of soft lights at the edge of the Black Sea. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. The night was peaceful, if a bit cold. I began to feel foolish for expecting anything at all. What had I thought would happen? That ghosts would materialize and tell me their stories? I was about to leave when I heard it. A soft scraping sound, like leather shoes on stone. I froze, scanning the darkness. Nothing moved. Hello? I called softly, immediately regretting breaking the silence. No response came, but the sensation of being watched intensified. I stood, turning slowly, peering into the shadows beyond the moonlit clearing. A figure stood at the edge of the trees. A man, middle-aged, wearing clothes that seemed oddly formal for a midnight hike. Dark trousers, a white shirt, and a worn woolen vest. Most striking was his hat, an old-fashioned cap like farmers wore in photographs from the 1940s. My throat constricted. He wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me with an expression I couldn't read in the darkness. I'm sorry, I said in my broken Greek. I didn't know anyone else would be here. The man tilted his head slightly but remained silent. Then, with deliberate slowness, he began walking toward me. His gait was smooth, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. Terror seized me. I snatched up my thermos and backpack, backing away as he approached. When the distance between us had shrunk to perhaps 20 meters, I turned and ran. I didn't look back until I'd reached the bottom of the hill, my lungs burning and legs trembling. When I finally stopped, panting and sweating despite the cool night, I gazed back up at the hill. The monument gleamed in the moonlight, but no figure pursued me. I was alone. That night, I barely slept. I told myself there were logical explanations. Perhaps he was a caretaker, someone who tended the monument, or another visitor who'd been as startled by me as I was by him. The explanations felt hollow even as I repeated them to myself. The next morning, I went to the town hall to inquire about the monument. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, regarded me suspiciously. "Why do you want to know?" she asked in Greek. "My grandmother is from here," I explained. "I'm trying to learn about our history." Her expression softened slightly. The monument is maintained by the town. There's no official caretaker, if that's what you're asking. So nobody works there? Nobody would have reason to be there late at night. She narrowed her eyes. Nobody goes there at night. Why do you ask these questions? I fabricated a story about seeing lights on the hill. She didn't seem convinced, but gave me some pamphlets about the town's history during the occupation. Later, I sought out Nicholas. We met at a small taverna overlooking the harbor where fishing boats bobbed gently on the afternoon tide. I described my experience, watching his face carefully as I spoke. You actually went up there at night? He asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and concern. I did. And I saw someone. A man. He approached me and I ran. Nicholas was quiet for a long moment. What did he look like, this man? I described him. His clothes, his hat, his deliberate way of moving. Thomas, Nicholas said finally, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to promise you won't go up there again at night. Why? Who was he? There's no caretaker for the monument. Nobody who works there, especially not at midnight. Then who did I see? Nicholas sighed. There are stories. People who've reported similar experiences. A man in old-fashioned clothes, always at night, always silent until approached. Are you saying I saw a ghost? I laughed nervously. I'm saying this town carries its history close to the surface, especially on that hill. He leaned forward. Promise me you won't go back there at night. I promised, with no intention of keeping my word. 2 nights later, I returned to Ypsilanti Hill. I told myself I was being rational, that I needed to confront my fear and find a logical explanation. In reality, I was drawn back by something I couldn't articulate, a pull as inexorable as gravity. This time, I brought a better flashlight and a small digital recorder. If something happened, I wanted evidence. The climb seemed easier now that I knew the path, though no less eerie. The moon was higher, casting sharper shadows across the ground. At the monument, I sat in the same spot, waiting. Hours passed with nothing but the distant sound of waves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Disappointment mingled with relief. Perhaps the previous encounter had been my imagination after all. Then, just as before, I heard the sound of footsteps. I turned to see the same man emerging from the trees, wearing the same clothes, the same hat. My hand trembled as I switched on the recorder. Hello? I called out, forcing steadiness into my voice. Do you speak English? The man stopped a few meters away. In the moonlight, I could see his face clearly now, weathered and deeply lined, with dark eyes that held a profound sadness. He looked to be in his 40s, though something about him suggested greater age. I've worked everywhere around these parts, he said in Greek-accented English. The sentence seemed disconnected from my question. I swallowed hard. Do you come here often? I need to go back to my wife and children soon. His voice was flat, emotionless. My skin prickled with unnatural cold. Are you from around here? I am. Always have been. He wasn't looking at me, but staring past me toward the town below. What's your name? I asked, pressing the recorder closer to him. He turned his gaze to me then, and the emptiness in his eyes made me step back. Am I disturbing you? I whispered. They did, he replied. Something in his tone made my blood run cold. I backed away further, stumbling over uneven ground. The man made no move to follow, just stood watching as I retreated toward the path. Once I felt I was at a safe distance, I turned and ran, not stopping until I reached the town. My heart hammered against my ribs, and sweat soaked through my shirt despite the cool night air. Back in my apartment, I immediately checked the recorder. The display showed it had been running for 3 hours. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. There was nothing but the sound of wind and my own breathing. No voice, no footsteps, no evidence that I'd spoken to anyone at all. The next day, I couldn't shake the encounter from my mind. The man's strange responses, his dead eyes, the way he seemed to look through me rather than at me. It all felt profoundly wrong. And the recorder, how could it have captured nothing? I needed to understand who he was. If he was a real person, someone in town would know him. If not, I didn't want to consider the alternative. I spent the day showing my phone's photograph of the monument to locals, asking if they knew of anyone who visited it regularly. Most shook their heads. A few crossed themselves. One old woman spat on the ground and hurried away from me. By late afternoon, I found myself at the small town museum, a single room attached to the library. Glass cases displayed artifacts from the town's long history, ancient pottery, fishing equipment, traditional costumes. In the back corner, a smaller display was dedicated to the occupation. I approached it slowly. Behind the glass lay photographs, yellowed with age. The town before the destruction. German soldiers standing in the square. Buildings reduced to rubble. A typed card explained the events in terse, clinical language. As I leaned closer to examine a group photograph of townspeople taken before the massacre, my heart stopped. In the back row, partially obscured but unmistakable, stood the man from the hill. Finding anything interesting? I jumped at the voice. The museum curator, an elderly man with thick glasses, had approached without my noticing. "This photograph," I said, pointing with a shaking finger. "The man in the back row with the cap. Who is he?" The curator peered through the glass. "Ah, that would be Georgios Alexakis, a fisherman, I believe." "Was he—" I hesitated. "Was he one of those killed on the hill?" "Yes. He had 3 young children and a pregnant wife." The curator shook his head sadly. "Why do you ask?" I couldn't answer. My mind was reeling, trying to process what this meant. The man I'd spoken to, the man who'd approached me on the hill, had been dead for over 70 years. "Are you all right, young man? You've gone quite pale." I mumbled something about needing air and stumbled out into the street. The bright afternoon sunlight felt obscene against the darkness spreading inside me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window of my apartment, watching the silhouette of the hill against the night sky. What was happening to me? Was I losing my mind? Or had I somehow encountered something that defied rational explanation? The logical part of my mind insisted there must be an explanation. Perhaps I'd seen someone who merely resembled the man in the photograph. Perhaps the curator had identified the wrong person. Perhaps my imagination, fueled by the town's tragic history, was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew the truth. The man on the hill was Georgios Alexakis, and he had died in 1941. I should have left town immediately. Instead, I decided to go back to the hill one last time. If I was going to face this, I wanted it to be on my terms. I needed to understand why he had appeared to me, what he wanted. The next night was cloudless, the stars impossibly bright above the Mediterranean. I climbed the hill for the 3rd time, my flashlight beam dancing ahead of me on the path. This time, fear accompanied me like a physical presence, sitting heavy on my shoulders. At the monument, I waited. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. Nothing happened. No footsteps, no ghostly figure emerging from the trees, just the sound of wind through the pines and my own anxious breathing. "Georgios," I finally called out, my voice sounding small in the vast darkness. "Georgios Alexakis." The wind seemed to die. Even the distant sounds of the town faded to nothing. The silence was absolute, pressing against my eardrums like a physical force. Then he was there, not approaching from the trees as before, but simply standing beside the monument, as if he'd been there all along. His face was clearer now, his features sharper. He looked directly at me, recognition flickering in his eyes. "You know my name," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to speak. "They took us from our homes," he continued, his voice even but laced with a grief so profound it seemed to alter the air around us. "They marched us up this hill. We thought they would make us work, perhaps. We didn't understand until we saw the guns." I stood frozen, torn between terror and an overwhelming sadness. This was real. I was speaking to a man who had died decades before I was born. "I never got to say goodbye," he said. "To my wife, my children. My youngest was just learning to walk." "I'm sorry," I whispered, though the words felt hopelessly inadequate. "They ask me why I stay," Georgios continued. "The others who come here, the living. They ask why I don't move on." He looked toward the town again, his gaze fixed on some point in the distance. "How can I leave? They're still there, waiting for me to come home." Understanding washed over me. He wasn't trying to frighten me or harm me. He was trapped, bound to this place by the suddenness of his death, by his attachment to those he'd loved. "Your family," I said gently. "They're gone now. They lived their lives. They remembered you." He turned back to me, his expression shifting subtly. "How do you know this?" "It's been more than 70 years, I explained. "I'm sorry, but they couldn't have waited forever." Something changed in his eyes. A flicker of comprehension, of terrible realization. 70 years? Yes. The war ended long ago. Greece is free. He looked down at his hands, studying them as if seeing them for the first time. "I have been here so long," he murmured, "walking this hill, night after night." "It's time to rest," I said, surprising myself with the words. "They would want you to find peace." Georgios raised his eyes to mine. For a brief moment, the emptiness was gone, replaced by something like gratitude. Then, without a word, he turned and walked toward the trees. I watched him go, expecting him to vanish before my eyes, but he simply receded into the darkness, his figure growing smaller until I could no longer see him. I left Greece a week later, cutting my trip short. I couldn't bear to climb that hill again, not even in daylight. Before departing, I visited the town cemetery and found the Alexakis family plot. I left flowers for Georgios and his family, a small gesture that felt both necessary and futile. On my last evening, I had dinner with Nicholas. I told him nothing of my final encounter on the hill, merely that I'd gone back and seen the man again. "Did you speak with him?" Nicholas asked. "Yes." "And did he answer?" I nodded, unable to elaborate without my voice betraying me. Nicholas studied me for a long moment. "You look different, Thomas. Changed." "I am," I admitted. "Will you tell others what you saw, what you experienced?" I considered the question. Who would believe me? How could I explain something I barely understood myself? "Only those who need to hear it," I said finally. Nicholas nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. Some encounters are not meant to be shared widely. They happen for a reason, between specific souls at specific moments. "Do you think I'll see him again if I return?" "I don't know," Nicholas said honestly. "Perhaps he found what he needed in your conversation." Later that night, as I packed my belongings, I found the German button I'd discovered on my first visit to the hill. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight, the small, tangible connection to a history both distant and immediate. I decided not to keep it. Instead, I walked down to the harbor in the pre-dawn darkness and threw it as far as I could into the sea. Some relics don't deserve preservation. 10 years have passed since that summer. I've never returned to that town, though I've thought of it often. Sometimes in dreams, I find myself climbing Ypsilanti Hill again, the moonlight guiding my steps. In these dreams, Georgios is already waiting at the monument, but his eyes are different, peaceful, resolved. I don't know if what I experienced was supernatural or psychological, if I encountered a ghost, or merely the projection of a town's collective trauma. Perhaps it doesn't matter. What matters is the understanding I gained. That history isn't confined to books and monuments. It lives on in places and people, echoing through time like ripples in still water. Some nights, when sleep eludes me, I find myself thinking of Georgios, a man torn from life without warning, bound to a hillside by love and loss. I hope wherever he is now, he's found his way home.